hearing session of, I think we've got 10 sitting days over the next 5 or 6 weeks. Can everyone hear me okay, first of all? Right, before I go through my introductory comments and explain the various procedural things, and before we get on to the first agenda item, I'd like to just let Nigel Lynn, the Chief Executive of West Berkshire Council, to say a few words by way of introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lynn. Okay. Right, I'm just going to go through a few procedural and sort of housekeeping things before we get on to the agenda items. A reminder, if everyone could please switch off their or onto silent their mobile phones, their laptops, etc. You will note that you've all got microphones or sharing microphones. If you could keep them turned off at all times, other than when I invite you to speak, and then obviously you press the button on the device and it will turn red, and then turn it off when you finish speaking. I think water's provided and will be replenished during the day, during adjournments. So if you could not bring any other sort of hot drinks or food into this room, please. There are no fire alarm tests planned for today, I understand. So if the alarm does go off, we will need to evacuate the building in an orderly fashion, I assume following the green exit signs to
You got tennis.
Right, thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah, okay. So we go out of the main door there, or the door here, and bear right, okay. Thank you. Ian Kemp, the programme officer, will be around all day. So if you need any sort of help from him and admin or anything like that, please just have a word with him. So as you'll be aware, today we are dealing with matters 1, which is legal and procedural requirements and other general matters, and matter 2, which is about the amount of housing, office and industrial warehouse development needed in the district. I've not split them up into 2 separate sessions, so that we've got some flexibility about how long we've got to cover the first set of issues under matter 1. What I have said on the agenda for those people that are only participating in matter 2 is that we won't start matter 2 before 2 o'clock, if that makes sense. It may be that matter 1 does extend after lunch. I don't know yet. It depends partly on how much you've got to say to me. I'm sort of assuming that we'll be able to finish matter 1 this morning around 1 o'clock, have a lunch break and then resume at 2 o'clock. But as I say, if we need to be more flexible about that, we can be. In terms of the morning and the afternoon sessions, we will have a comfort break for around 20 minutes, around 11 o'clock in the morning and around 3 o'clock, 3:30 in the afternoon. I think there is a cafe available in the building, so you'll be able to get refreshments there during the breaks. In terms of the purpose of this hearing session, well, from my point of view, it's to help me decide if the plan is sound and legally compliant, and if not, how it could be modified to ensure that it is. It's also obviously an opportunity for those that made representations about the plan to express your views to me. However, I just like to emphasise that, of course, I've read the representations, I've read your written statements. So the purpose of today is not to recite to me the comments that you've made, but it's very much to focus on the questions that I've got to ask and for people to respond to those to help me determine, as I say, whether the plan's sound and if not, how it can be modified. Okay. The way that we'll run each session is that I'll go through all of the agenda items. On each, I'll usually start with a few questions to the council and allow them to respond to those. Once I've been through those questions with the council, I'll open up for others to make points or to respond to what you've heard from the council. At the end of each agenda item, I'll go back to the council and give them a final opportunity to sum up what their position is. Okay, in terms of written material, you'll be aware that there was the opportunity to make Regulation 19 representations, and then there was written statements in response to my matters, issues and questions. So those deadlines have now gone. There isn't now an opportunity to provide further written material unless I specifically ask for something from either the council or other participants. In terms of the plan and main modifications, as is normal practice, since submitting the plan, the council has proposed a number of main modifications in response to representations made and questions that I've asked of it. They were set out in a series of documents over the last few months. There is a comprehensive schedule that was published last week, which I think, I'm not made a note of it now, it is Exam 23, and it was published last Thursday. So that is the full set of modifications that the council has proposed to date. So if people can bear that in mind when we come on to talk about particular policies and parts of the plan. So each of those modifications will be discussed at the relevant hearing session, so people will have the opportunity to comment on those if they haven't already done so in their written statements in response to some of the ones that were proposed earlier by the council. In terms of my role, I ultimately have to decide what modifications I think are necessary to the plan based on soundness, so they have to be necessary to address a soundness deficiency. I can't recommend changes to the plan to make it better, to improve it, or to respond to good points that people may be making about it. That process has gone. That was the process of the council consulting and preparing the plan over the years that it spent doing that. In terms of what happens following the discussions at each hearing session, I will normally make clear during the session or at the end of the session or possibly the following day if there are particular things that I've made a interim decision about or feel that I need further work doing or something preparing. So that will happen as we go through each day. At the end of each week, I will probably publish a note setting out any specific actions that I'm asking the council to take, either on its own or in liaison with anyone else. So hopefully that will become clear as we go through. Finally, just a reminder about the conduct of the hearing sessions. Local planning examinations are formal events. I will run it in as an informal a way as possible to allow people to discuss and feel comfortable. But please bear in mind that you need to treat everybody with respect and fairness. Only one person to speak at a time when I've asked you to do so. Don't interrupt others, please. And you just retain normal sort of courteous behaviour. So what I'm going to do now, before we move on to the agenda items, is go around the table and let everybody introduce themselves. I'll start with the council and go around that way, anti-clockwise. So when it comes to as it creeps around the table, as it approaches you, when it comes your turn, if you could turn your microphone button on, make sure the microphones, I think they seem to pick up quite well as far as I can tell the sound, but just make sure the microphone's low enough and pointing roughly the right direction. So this will be the first test of everyone using the IT kit before you say anything more meaningful other than your name and briefly introduce who you are. Thank you. So I could start with the council.
So good morning. My name's Emmeline Lambert, council, instructed by Sarah Clark, the Service Director for Strategy and Governance at West Berkshire District Council.
Morning, my name's Laura Callard. I'm Policy Infrastructure and Place Manager here at West Berkshire.
Morning, I'm Paula Amarelli, Planning Policy Team Leader at West Berkshire Council.
Good morning, I'm Sarah Conlon and I work in the Planning Policy Team at West Berkshire Council.
Good morning, sir. Andrew Black Consulting on behalf of Bucklebury Parish Council.
So, just to clarify, Mr. Pipe, are you representing Thatcham Town Council today? And you'll make that clear. Okay, thank you very much. Right, thank you. Just while I think of it now, could everyone please, for my benefit, I'm being selfish again, but that's just how I am. Could you tilt your nameplates sort of towards me a bit and also make sure they're not covered up by cups and laptops and bottles and things? There goes the first casualty. I'd leave those. Right, okay, thank you. If we could move on to, I think it's Claire Lawrence next.
That's right. Good morning. I'm Claire Lawrence. I'm the Executive Director of Place at West Berkshire Council. Good morning. My name is Sharon Armour and I'm the Legal Services Manager at West Berkshire Council.
Morning, sir. Phil Robinson from Texas Group, representing Walker's Logistics.
Good morning, sir. John Litton, King's Council, representing Walker Logistics.
Good morning, sir. I'm Catherine Miles from Provision. I'm here with my colleagues Gareth Johns and James Isles. We're representing a number of clients. I'll just list them out. So TA Fisher and their interest in Mortimer and Burfield Common, Hope and Clay in relation to Easter Park, Carla had various land interests, Newbury Racecourse, Mr. and Mrs. Pittard at Lowway Farm, and Wasing Estates in relation to Brinton and Aldermaston Wharf. Thank you.
Thank you. In terms of when you wish to speak, unless it's particularly relevant for what we need to say, you don't need to explain who you're particularly speaking on behalf of, I don't think, each time, otherwise it's going to, okay, but thank you. We've got for the record, we've got who your representations are on behalf of, so I'm aware that you've got a number of different clients. Thank you.
Good morning, sir. Mark Barrett from the Home Builders Federation. Good morning, sir. Tim Burden from Turley on behalf of Donington New Homes.
Good morning, Matthew Spry from Lichfields, representing the North East Thatcham Partnership.
Good morning, sir. Mary Cook from Town Legal, representing the owners of Pinsent Lane.
Morning, sir. Mike Bodkin, Head of Planning with Town, no relation to Town Legal, but also here on behalf of Pinsent Lane.
Morning, sir. Roger Tastane, Nexus Planning, representing Crowdhouse Homes.
Okay, thank you for that, and welcome to everybody. The microphones all seem to be working. I assume that the IT is working okay. Just, I mean, I'm sure you're all aware that this is being, each hearing session is being broadcast on the council's YouTube. But I don't think that they will be retained for future watching. So it's just an opportunity, because obviously the space in this room is relatively limited if people wish to come and observe. So it's available for people who can't be here and do wish to see the proceedings. Okay, right. Are there any procedural questions or points that anybody wishes to make before I turn to the main items on the agenda under matter one? No, good. Okay, thank you. Right, the first matter under matter one is about the duty to cooperate. And the question I asked was if there is any substantive evidence to indicate that the council failed to comply with the duty to cooperate during the preparation of the plan up until the date on which it was submitted for examination, which I understand to be the legal requirement and the period to which that requirement relates. So I've just got a few questions to the council about a couple of issues, some of which we'll come back to in terms of the soundness, but this is strictly about the procedural way in which the council prepared the plan. So there seem to be two main issues where there has been the suggestion, by some at least, that the council can't have cooperated effectively because there's unresolved issues. So the first of those, sorry, when I ask questions to the council, I won't direct them to anyone in particular. I guess, Ms. Lambert, you'll direct it as necessary, or shall I speak to you in the first instance in most cases?
So yes, that's fine, and I'll hand it over to whoever
Right. Okay.
is responsible in the team. Thank you.
Okay, so the first issue which some have said, well, this wasn't resolved and therefore you can't have engaged effectively with your neighbouring authorities, is about the issue of Reading's unmet housing need. As I said, we'll come back to that this afternoon, actually, in terms of the housing requirements. But in terms of the process, and I don't want to have I'm sure there's a lot of background to this, but in terms of the point is why is it not resolved? Why is it not clearer as to there is agreement about how much Reading's unmet need is based on its adopted plan, and there seems to be agreement that it ought to be met in Western Berkshire, which is not just West Berkshire, it's Wokingham and maybe somewhere else, I can't remember. But anyway, why is it still outstanding, and why is it not clearer in this plan about whether the plan is accommodating it or it should be accommodated somewhere else in terms of the process?
So I'm going to hand over to Mrs. Amorini.
Thank you. So at the point of submission, the council considers that the duty to cooperate in relation to Reading's unmet need has been complied with, and it would point to Reading Borough Council's response to the Regulation 19 consultation, pages 10 to 11. It would also point to examination document 7, the letter from Bracknell Forest Borough Council, which is also in support. Obviously this is coming up later on in the agenda as well, but the matter, Reading acknowledges that the matter will need to be revisited as part of Reading's local plan review, which is due to commence in 2023, given that the standard methodology would significantly increase Reading's housing need. And it should therefore be noted that the matter of unmet housing need will need to be revisited in a future local plan review.
I think it's figure of 245. I don't want to get into the detail of this, but in terms of the procedure, there is an identified amount of need that wasn't met in the adopted Reading plan. That's factually correct, is it? Yes?
It is,
yeah.
Yes.
And there is agreement that should be met in Western Berkshire, is that right?
It is, yes.
But there's not an agreement beyond that about where it should be met in Western Berkshire, is
That's
that right?
Yes.
So why isn't there? If you've engaged effectively between the authorities.
But I think at the point of time that we were doing the memorandum of understanding, it was.
Sorry, I can't hear.
Okay, sorry. At the point in time that the memorandum of understanding was being prepared, it was the principle that was being agreed. And everyone was at different stages of the local plan at that point in time. And there was not a need at that time to kind of divide it up, and we hadn't gone that far. Reading then, they were obviously quite far behind us. They then said that they needed to review their plan and to wait because their housing need was based on the SMAR figure and not on the LHN. And so they obviously knew that they needed to then comply with the LHN and that would be updated.
Okay.
The need is also in the later part of the plan period.
Yeah, okay, well, we'll come back to that. So none of the other authorities are alleging that there's not been cooperation and effectiveness.
No.
The fact that it wasn't resolved that it should be all in West Berkshire, for example, was because there was an opportunity to deal with it in this plan or consider it, or because
At the point of submission, yes, there was.
yeah. So were the neighbours assuming that this plan was meeting that 245?
Yes,
The
236. Yeah.
236, sorry. Okay. Okay, thank you. I don't think I've got anything else on that.
Sir, can
Yes,
I,
yes.
since that point, in relation to Reading, they've undertaken a Reg 10A review of the local plan, which dated March 2023, and that concluded that policy H1 was out of date and required review. And the review noted that the need had changed and the supply had changed, meaning that not only the H1 requirement, but the OAN of 699 per year is expected to be met and exceeded over the plan period. So there has been an update since that point in relation to Reading.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think that's relevant to this afternoon. It's not a procedural point really about the duty to cooperate, is it? Or are you saying, well, nobody really cares very much because it was a small number and it was going to change anyway? So
not that no one cares. No, that wouldn't be how to categorize it. But yes, it was small, and yes, there's been an update to that level as well.
I apologise for my casual language. It slips out sometimes. Sorry. Right. Okay. If anyone else has got an issue, wants to come back on that, they can do. I'm just going to ask the council another couple of questions about duty to cooperate. And this is about another issue, which it's been suggested that you can't have cooperated effectively because there was an outstanding representations made by the National Health. I'm going to call it the National Health Service. I know it was the clinical commissioning body or the integrated care board, but can we call them NHS for simplicity? During the preparation of the plan, because, well, had you effectively cooperated, you'd have worked out what was needed at the North East Thatcham site, and you wouldn't have had objections from the NHS and GP practices about what the plan was proposing. We're not going to talk about that issue today because obviously that's for another day, along with all the other issues on the North East Thatcham site. But again, is it indicative of a failure by the council to effectively engage with prescribed bodies, or is it not? And if not, why not?
The council would say it's not. It would point to paragraph 5.26 of the duty to cooperate statement, which is CD 11, which sets out how the council has actively and constructively engaged on a regular basis with the ICB in the production of the local plan review. It makes clear that since October 2020, there have been regular officer and ICB meetings where the implications of the LPR in terms of its impact on healthcare and possible future requirements are discussed. Meetings have also taken place with the NHS and the 3 GP surgeries who cover the North East Thatcham proposed strategic development. So that's Birdwood, Chapel Row and Thatcham Healthcare in September 2021 and December 22. And whilst the nature of the provision of primary healthcare on North East Thatcham is not set out in the statement, it makes clear that the duty has and is continuing to be complied with.
So I think there was an allegation by someone that there didn't seem to be evidence of regular meetings during the preparation of the plan with the relevant NHS bodies, but you're saying there were. meetings, yeah.
There were.
Okay. So, and why was it then, why was this issue about the size of this facility? Why did the council end up putting, a fixed figure in about the size of a facility that turned out that the relevant bodies didn't agree with?
My understanding was that when the policy was being prepared, it was designed to be helpful, and that it had been based on information that had been received in relation to another strategic site. So I believe that this is coming up when we're in more detail when we're discussing North East Thatcham.
So meetings were held, sorry. Meetings were held, discussions were had. That figure, it wasn't that it was just a mistake, or it was based on evidence that later transpired that they didn't agree with.
To my knowledge, the figure wasn't actually discussed at those meetings. I think they were more general.
Okay, I've not got any other questions about the duty to cooperate. I mean, obviously you've provided, a lot of evidence about what, the strategic matters and the effort and the procedures the council went to. So unless you've got anything else you wish to say from the council's point of view, I'll see if anyone around the table has got any comments they wish to make about the duty to cooperate. And Mr. Pike, I'll bring you in. But can we just keep it focused on process, not about North East Thatcham and the merits or the soundness of the proposal there?
Thank you, sir. So following the apparent inconsistency between the representations at Regulation 19 made by the Integrated Health Board and the Birdwood Surgery and the statement of duty to cooperate, I made a Freedom of Information request to West Berkshire Council, which you've got as my statement in response to matter 1, where I requested information about discussions between West Berkshire Council and that health board. And in summary, the response was that there were no agendas or minutes of any meetings where this was discussed. And they sent me some emails, which I've collated to make it easier for you to follow, which indicated that there were very few, if any, meetings at all. And it was unclear who'd attended those meetings and therefore whether they were in a position to discuss the local plan at all. So I assume you've read that. I don't need to go into any details, but draw your attention to that very tangible, I would say compelling evidence that there was no duty to cooperate. Thank you.
Yeah.
Duty to cooperate had not been complied with.
Yeah, understood. Yeah. Anything else that anybody wishes to say on duty to cooperate? Yes, Mr. Black, Bucklebury.
Thank you, sir. Wary about straying into issues on North East Thatcham, but just on this healthcare facility, obviously you've been presented within the main modifications of modification in relation to that facility. It's no longer a GP surgery, it's now just a general healthcare facility. So we would say that's indicative of the outcome of that duty to cooperate, in effect going backwards from something that was specific and would have been an expected outcome to something that's far wider ranging. There's a number of other changes in those main mods which we say point towards those issues. If it had have been an effective process, these matters would have been clear and it would have stayed as a fixed amount. In fact, what you've now been presented with is something that's more ambiguous within that. Just one other point on that, and again, it is a North East Thatcham point. I don't want to get a yellow card so early in proceedings, but there's significant reference within the council's matter statements, within their responses to you around cooperation, but it relates specifically to the preparation of the Thatcham growth study. Now, we have some issues with that in general as a document and how it works within the plan. And I think there's a question in terms of where that cooperation was in relation to the preparation of a document. So Thatcham growth study was far different to what you're now presented in a plan. Is that the same as duty to cooperate in general? And there just seems to be some conflicts in our mind on that.
Well, we'll deal with all the soundness issues about the North East Thatcham site. I don't understand the point, I don't think, about the duty to cooperate. I mean, the duty to cooperate doesn't apply directly to the Thatcham growth study. It applies to the preparation of the plan. Are you suggesting that something different?
Well, we'll probably come into this more at the North East Thatcham section, But that growth study was in relation to a far greater amount of units. That was 2,500 units. And local residents were being consulted on that as a specific issue. That's then related back to duty to cooperate in general. And we say there's two separate matters there.
Okay, well, we'll come on to the duty to cooperate is a very specific thing. I think you're talking also about general consultation about during the preparation of the plan as well, which I'm going to come on to shortly. So, okay, thank you. And anything else on duty to cooperate that anybody wishes to say? No, okay. Well, thank you. I mean, understood those points, and you know, I can think about those. Anything that the council wishes to say before I move on from the duty?
Just really to say that that the written statement prepared by the ICB, so that's WS4 mentions that the council has formally and proactively engaged with the ICB, and that both parties agree that the current wording relating to the primary healthcare at North East Thatcham will need to be amended and the proposed wording should be removed.
Yeah, okay, well, as I say, we'll come back to that. I'm struggling a little bit to hear some people, so I think if you could maybe move your microphone a little bit closer to you two. It's partly because there's a bit of noise out.
So, excuse me, I can't, there's some noise outside.
Yeah.
It's really distracting because I can hear bits, but not.
Yeah.
Can somebody tell people to
It-
be a bit quiet outside?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can we just, is that, yeah. Thank you. I think there's also a wedding on here this morning. So there is likely to be some background noise, which is not unusual. I think that, I mean, the microphones do seem to work quite effectively. So I think if people are making sure they're speaking up and into the microphone, I think we can overcome a bit of noise. But if you are struggling to hear, yeah, I understood. Yeah, yeah, okay, yeah, okay, right. So unless there's anything else on the duty to cooperate, I'll move on to the second issue, the second item on the agenda, which is public consultation more widely. And essentially, there's a legal duty to comply with the state. There's a national policy expectation that plans are prepared with effective consultation with, you know, the public and all interested parties. There's also a legal requirement for the council to publish a statement of community involvement and to comply with what it says it will do in that statement of community involvement. And the council, in response to my questions, has advised me that yes, it did comply with its statement of community involvement, and its written statement actually specifically addressed a number of points that have been raised in Regulation 19 representations about that. So people all have had an opportunity to see those responses, and if they wish to come back on those, they can do. But I've read what you've said. There's a general point that was raised by one representative that I'll ask the council about. Basically, it points out that in response to Regulation 19 consultation, there were around 1,700 comments from nearly 700 people. So quite a significant amount of material to consider. And they say that the consultation statement was prepared and the plan was submitted within 19 working days. Between the 6th and the 30th of March. One could say, congratulations to the council for being so efficient. But I think the point being made is, well, you can't really properly consider all those responses, can you? If you've done it so quickly. You want to respond to that point?
I can confirm that it was a very intense period and that we had additional resources provided. So at one point we had up to 24 members of staff working on getting the work done, and that it was submitted in accordance with our local development scheme.
Okay, thank you for that. Yes, I know what I was going to say. And the council did prepare a thorough summary of the issues raised in the representations and a response to those in general terms. But the council made a decision not to respond to them, but not to say, well, we're going to suggest the plan be modified at that stage. And that was a tactical decision on behalf of the council, was it? To identify the issue, but not to preempt what this process may.
It was, yes.
Thank you. Right. And as I said in your statement, you dealt with a number of matters about the availability of the council website, the publication of evidence, consulting bodies about North East Thatcham, and Bucklebury Council on the boundary review. You've responded to those points in there. So I don't think there's anything else I need to ask you about. If others want to come back on any of those or any other points, I'll let them do so. Unless there's anything else on public consultation you wish to say at this stage, I'll hand on round to Bucklebury and Thatcham. Sorry, not Bucklebury. Hang on, now I'm getting confused. You're speaking with two hats.
Thank you. I'm going to try to divide the two aspects. So firstly, Thatcham Town Council made detailed comments on the sustainability appraisal for the policy for North East Thatcham in its Regulation 19 representations. And of course, that appraisal was significantly different to the one at Regulation 18 because of the changes in the policy. Now, that, of course, should be considered under the environmental information regulation, environmental assessment of plans and programs regulations, as well as or in addition to, as well as or instead of the Regulation 19 or Regulation 20 consultation, because they are fall under those regulations. And my understanding so there was no comment in the assessment that was published on those detailed comments that Thatcham Town Council made. So if I turn to, sorry.
Just one sec. We're going to talk about sustainability appraisal on item 4.
Yeah.
This is specifically about.
This is about the procedure rather than
the consultation on the SA.
Yes.
So there wasn't an opportunity to comment on it.
No, well, there wasn't. The consultation, if there was one, wasn't carried out in accordance with those regulations.
Cause specifically what?
So can I change hats now, please? So those regulations specify firstly in very detailed terms the format of the request for comments, the wording that needs to be made, and that a consideration has to be given to those comments before the plan is submitted. I think the wording is a legal process in those regulations. So that is in addition, I believe, to the process Regulation 19/2021 for local plan examination. So firstly, as an individual, I made another freedom of information request to the council. Unfortunately, that was made in response to the council's representation, so it was too late to be included in the written documentation. So I asked for information on the assessment that had been made, and in summary, there was none of the.
Sorry, assessment of what?
Of the any responses made to the in respect of the environmental assessment, which therefore should be considered under the 2004 regulations.
So let me just make sure I'm understanding. The sustainability appraisal was carried out during the preparation of the plan at Reg 18 and Reg 19, and it's a process of it. There were different reports at different times. It was published with the plan at Reg 19.
Yes.
And you commented, people had an opportunity to comment on it.
Yes. Well,
but the wording of the invitation to comment wasn't as you think.
So the wording, the comment, the request, if there was one to comment on it, was incidental to the request to comment on the Regulation 19 comment.
Okay, and you say that was not in compliance with the EIA regs?
Yes, that's Regulation 8. That's Regulation 8.
Okay, and then you're saying that the council failed to consider the representations made at Reg 19 about the SA?
Yes. Because they have to consider it, and therefore there should be some record of that consideration.
Okay.
So I made a freedom of information request for the documentation relating to that consideration, and the only documents that were referenced in response were the documents relating to Regulation 18 and Regulation 19. And of course, there's nothing mentioned in the documentation of Regulation 19 relating to the comments that were made on sustainability appraisal. So in summary, there's no evidence of the council having considered those representations that were made in Regulation 19 in relation to the SA, even though there wasn't a proper request for comments to be made in the first place.
I think I've got your 2 points, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So I have the email thread, which obviously it's too late to submit formally as a contribution, but I can make that available if that would be helpful to you.
Well, you could have made that, you could have put that in with your written statement.
No, because it was made, I realised this issue in response to the council's representations on matter one and made the freedom of information request after that. So that is why it was.
Okay, well, I think I understand the point anyway.
Yeah,
So you're saying that the request for commenting on the essay didn't meet the specific wording requirements of the EIA regulations. And that the council didn't consider the comments that they got anyway. Fine, okay, right. The council can come back on that. Are there any other points about public consultation, specifically any failure by the council to comply with its statement of community involvement that anybody wishes to make? Right, do you want to have a go at addressing those 2 points if we could?
So this is Rachel Lancaster. She wasn't introduced earlier.
Hi, thank you. So in response to the first question about the details of the consultation on the essay, that was set out in the statement of representation. So as part of that was sent out alongside the letter about the consultation on the local plan review for Reg 19 was this statement of consultation which went out attached to the email that went out, and that included the specific details of the essay consultation.
So when you say the statement of representation, you mean when the plan was published for Regulation 19, under Regulation 19, and all the evidence and other documents, including the essay?
Yeah.
There was a statement that the council put out inviting comments and explaining the format.
Yeah.
I think the point is that the SEA regs, I don't know which reg it is, presumably you've checked this. I think the allegation is that the SEA regs require a certain form of words to invite comments on the environmental report, i.e. the essay, as we call it in this case.
I would need to check what those say and then compare the two. I don't have it right to hand, but to my understanding, it was correctly advertised as being available for consultation as part of the Reg 19 consultation. It was also published on the website, again, as a separate heading, inviting comments on the essay specifically. I need to check the wording to be able to come back on that one.
I don't want, if this is becoming a legal compliance issue, we might have to do a bit more work on it. But I mean, my understanding of the SEA regs and the town and country planning regulations for consultation, they're separate bits of legislation, they kind of run in parallel. But the SEA regs don't refer to, points in the plan making process anyway, do they?
No, they don't.
It's about plans and projects in general that start and finish, and it could be quite a different process.
Yes.
And the consultation requirement for the SEA report, the environmental report, presumably is something that could be done later on anyway in this process.
Yes, it doesn't have to be done alongside the plan. It can be done completely separately.
No.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so you think, well, you're saying you haven't checked, but you think it was correctly advertised and correctly invited comments, but the substantive point is that you're saying it was available and you invited comments on it?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I'll wait, just hold on. So that's the first point. Second point, when you're aware, presumably the council's aware that it got some comments about the essay.
Yes.
And did you consider them, and was that very clear?
They were considered alongside all the other comments. The decision was made that the plan was sound and therefore we were going to submit it, and therefore no changes were made to the SEA as a result of that. We will, if main modifications are required, those will all be subject to SEA, and that will then be consulted on as part of that consultation. So it is correct, we haven't updated the essay based on comments made at Reg 19 because the plan was submitted as it was. We will subsequently consult on it if required.
In submitting the plan for examination, you provided a summary report of the issues raised in consultation responses, and that was broken down into sections of the plan and various other topics. Was there a section in that document that were dealt with, itemised the comments about the sustainability?
I believe there was, yes, but I would need a colleague to just check.
Well, can you confirm that?
The comments were considered in the round. Sorry, the comments were considered in the round. So, for instance, under SP1 spatial strategy, which is on page 9 of Appendix 2, that includes comments on the SEA.
Sorry, I mean, I can look this up, but what you're saying is the way that report, the statement of consultation is structured is by the sections of the plan. it doesn't have a separate section, sustainability appraisal.
That's right, it was
But
conditional.
within the sections of the plan, any relevant comments that were made about the SA, you're saying you identified them in there as well. Is that what you're saying?
That is, yes.
So you did consider them and you did report on any significant issues raised?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? Excuse me. Anything else the council wants to say? And I think Mr. Pike will want to have another word. I'm getting a neck ache looking this way all the time. I'm waiting to turn around. Yes, Mr. Pike.
Yeah, thank you. So firstly, the format for the wording of a request for comments on SA is in Regulation 13 of the 2004 regulations, the Environmental Assessment of Plans and Programs regulations. And it's very good. It specifies a number of specific items. I think if you look at that call for comments on Regulation 19, the request for comments on the SA was in fact incidental and not a specific request anyway, but it certainly doesn't include what is required for the regulations. My recollection, so whether I need to go back and look again, is that there was no comments in the statement of consultation in relation to SP 17, which is where Thatcham Town Council went through systematically reviewing all of the points in the table in Appendix 5 and suggesting a number of alternatives. So given that the regulations require that the assessment is made before the legal process starts, I can't remember the wording in Regulation 8, but it is an explicit statement there, which that regulation is a bit convoluted, but my understanding of it as a non-qualified lawyer is that there is a requirement for the comments made to be considered before the legal process for approval starts. And the general statement, if there was one, I don't think is sufficient to fulfil that obligation. Thank you.
But Thatcham Town Council made detailed comments on the sustainability appraisal and submitted them with its Reg 19 reps. So irrespective of any issue that there may or may not have been about detailed wording, the Town Council was aware that it could comment on the SA and apply it to the plan and make comments about it.
So, well, this was a problem because the way that the consultation was written, there wasn't a distinction between, in fact, because we were only invited to comment using the template for a Regulation 19 consultation. You had to sort of squint rather hard in order to make comments on the sustainability appraisal at all, because there wasn't any particular way of doing so. The table was asking you to comment policy by policy and not document by document. So we made a comment, we found a way of, I think it was by reference to SB 17, but we made a detailed comments, and the appendix, the assessment of strategic policies, had a table, I think it ran for 3 or 4 pages with assessment of individual characteristics of whether they were improved or degraded by that. And we went through and systematically commented on each of them and came to a different conclusion on a number. And that seems to require more than just a general statement that something's been taken into account. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, no, understood, thank you. Right, okay, thanks. Right, do you want to just come back on the SA consultation?
Briefly, so thank you. 2 things. I've looked at Regulation 13 of the 2004 regulations, further to Mr. Pike letting us know that that's the regulation he's dealing with. I can't see a requirement for specific wording within Regulation 13. As far as I can see, all aspects of Regulation 13 were complied with. In terms of regard being had to the comments, the second point, you've heard how that was done. That was done. It wasn't done in a separate section, but it was done in the round per policy as and when necessary. And I know that Rachel Lancaster has something else to add.
In terms of the comment on the specific comment form that was sent out for response, it did have options for policies, but there was also another box on the form that said any other. So you could have written in that other box, you were commenting on the essay specifically, so that there was an option to, alter that form as to which document you were commenting on.
And that could have been used for any of the evidence documents. But I suppose the point may be, well, that's fine, but the essay is a bit different because there is a separate legal requirement to consult on that. As you say, the essay report, the essay report will be updated if there are modifications that are decided necessary to the plan. And that will be subject to public consultation. And therefore the final or near final essay report will be published towards the end of this examination, if there was a particular form of wording or there was a more explicit requirement to invite comments on that essay report, presumably it could be put in at that time, and that would that still comply with the regulations?
I believe it would. And yes, we could update our letters and our information that's sent out to make very specific reference to the essay. I mean, we believe that our representation statement did make it clear the SEA essay could be commented on, but we can look at that wording and review it if you consider that we need.
Okay, right. I think final brief point, Mr. Pike, because we spent a long time on
yes,
this.
Just to clarify, there's not a specific wording, but there's a specific number of items to be included in the statement, which is in part 3 of Regulation 13. And some of those items were not part of the Regulation 19 request because they are not required by that regulation. So things I think the ability for people to receive the documents by post, for example, was not in the statement. But I think if you check, compare the Regulation 9 and 13C of the 2004 regulations with those statements, both for Regulation 18 and Regulation 19, you will find that they are not compliant. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. We'll move on. I may ask for a short note clarifying what was said and what the regs require. Give Ms. Lambert a little job to do. So that we can be clear about this, and if there is anything that needed to be learnt that could be applied when the final essay report is published for consultation alongside any modifications, to make sure that that is done at that time. But I think we're going to talk about the essay, but more importantly, we'll talk about what it finds and what you say it could have found or should have found in relation to specific policies and sites, North East Thatcham, when we come on to that. So we'll talk only about the essay generally in a minute, but in terms of its application to particular policies and sites, we'll leave that until the relevant hearing session if we could. Okay, anything else on public consultation that anybody wishes to say? Anything further from you? No, okay. Right, so got a couple of issues now. Equalities. There is a legal duty on the council and indeed on myself in carrying out the examination to comply with the Equality Act 2010. The council provided evidence about the likely or anticipated impacts in terms of the requirements of the Act. And it identified impacts that he thought the plan would have on people with protected groups with protected characteristics. So I've seen all that. I've understood that, and insofar as there are issues about equalities and the Equality Act, as we go through the particular policies in the plan, I'll be considering those as we do. So I've not got any other legal issues about this particular legal requirement about compliance with the Equality Act 2010, and it's not directly my role to consider whether you have or have not complied with the Equality Act 2010. I need to comply with it as well, but that's a process. But anyway, I don't think anyone made any written statements or comments about this. I don't think there's any comments anybody wishes to make. No. Okay. Right, which brings us back onto the sustainability appraisal. As I say, I don't want to get bogged down in terms of how the implications of this for policies and sites and allocations in the plan. I just want to give the opportunity, though, to see if there are any issues around the process of carrying out the appraisal, and specifically whether there wasn't any, if there's any evidence that it failed to meet legal requirements. We've dealt with one legal requirement in the SEA regs, which is about consultation, so that's fine. That's that one. The other one that people have made comments about are the issue of considering reasonable alternatives, which is a legal requirement in the SEA regs in the preparation of the plan. And it's a matter in the first instance for the council to determine what are reasonable alternatives in relation to the strategy, in relation to policies, sites, etc. So I'm going to run, and I am aware that the reasonable alternatives were identified by the council and they were appraised in the sustainability appraisal. So it wasn't something that wasn't done. The issue is, did you identify all reasonable alternatives and did you properly appraise them? First question about the essay, though, is it was done in-house, which isn't unheard of. It's not even unusual. And because it's an ongoing process to inform the preparation of the plan, I can see that there are advantages sometimes of doing it in-house as a sort of iterative process to inform choices about what goes in the plan. But I think the point has been made, well, it wasn't an objective, was it? Because the council's basically appraising itself and concluding things about itself. So do you want to just respond to that allegation?
So yeah, there's no requirement for the SEA to be carried out independently. Being done in-house supports the iterative and systematic approach required by the SEA. And it does actually give the council more control over the process. You can quickly respond to the need to test a different option that might have come up. There's no need to go back to a consultant and take time, so it can speed up the process of that taking place. It's the same process that's been done for a number of other local plans that the council have carried out. The Minerals and Waste Local Plan, which was adopted in December 2022, used the same process, as did the Housing Site Allocations DPD, which was adopted in May 2017.
And how did you ensure objectivity in terms of, was it the use of particular criteria and information evidence, subjective evidence that was basically, because I mean, there are judgments involved. And obviously if you're a council officer and you're making judgments based on these criteria and information, you may come to a different one than someone coming from a different viewpoint. So how did you try and ensure objectivity in that sense?
So quite a lot of the assessments were carried out collaboratively. So using, together with a number of different people from different teams or working on different sections of the plan. It wasn't carried out by one person necessarily on its own. To allow those discussions to take place, to kind of go, well, I think this, what do you think? So it wasn't just done by one person looking at it. It was done with an opportunity to discuss what those different outcomes we thought might be.
And when reasonable alternatives were identified, they were identified through a similarly sort of collaborative approach, were they?
Yes, they were.
And obviously they're altered depending on whether you're talking about alternatives to an overall spatial strategy or whether it's alternatives to site allocations or whatever else, or detailed policy winning. But when they were identified, were all the reasonable alternatives assessed against the same criteria, using the same information to the same level of detail?
Yes, they were. It was done on a consistent basis across all the different things that were being considered.
There's some points made, I think, in written statements about, for example, retained allocations were assessed differently from options for new allocations. Is that correct?
That is correct. So the starting point for carrying forward the allocations was done outside the SEA process. It was done as part of a review of the core strategy and the housing site allocations DPD, and a comprehensive deliverability assessment was carried out. That's appended to the housing background paper. So that we can discuss at another stage if we need to. That looked at those sites as whether they were deliverable, and therefore there was an assumption they would be taken forward if they were still considered deliverable, and therefore they haven't been assessed as a reasonable alternative for new allocation because they were an existing allocation to be taken forward. Some sites have come out that were previously allocated because they're no longer considered to be deliverable. But yes, so in terms of that was done differently because they were an existing allocation, not being considered as a basket of sites for allocation in this plan as a new allocation.
But I suppose when you say they were assessed in the HELA, if they were deliverable, that include whether they were still suitable in the sense of you could have had a different spatial strategy, which meant that sites that were previously allocations would become unsuitable or possibly less suitable than potential new allocations because of the spatial strategy having changed. Was that factored into that assessment?
Yeah, in terms of the reasonable alternatives, in terms of the distribution of development, different options were considered, about 5 different options. The first option.
It was more to do with whether the allocations that were carried forward from previously adopted plans. You just turn your mic off a sec. were they considered to be suitable in terms of the new options for a spatial strategy?
The spatial strategy being carried forward is the same as the previous one, but or very similar, and therefore those sites, they didn't need to be considered outside that because the same spatial strategy was being taken forward with the slight change around the eastern area, so they still fit within that spatial strategy.
Okay, thank you. Right. Now, in terms of a number of alternatives that representatives have said should have been considered, I'm just going to run through some of these and you can say whether they were identified. I mean, there's a limited number of alternatives you can identify for any particular thing. I understand that, but I'll just let you respond to each of these in turn if I could. So meeting affordable homes in full through increasing the housing requirement above local housing need by certain percentages, I think 15 and 20% was an alternative considered of a higher figure.
Yes, so the SEA does consider a different housing figure. It included boosting supply and significantly boosting supply. I can find the reference.
Yeah,
that is included in the essay as a reasonable alternative.
More development in the eastern area, including potentially, well, in areas not constrained by the emergency planning zone and presumably flood risk, but also potentially within those areas. So more.
So the eastern area, the sites that were available were considered as part of the basket of sites that were reasonable alternatives. There are very limited numbers of sites available in the eastern area. The spatial strategy, again, looked at different options, which included development in the eastern area. And again, because of the limitations of where there are sites and the constraints of that area, it wasn't considered reasonable to focus development in that area. And where there are suitable sites in the area, they have been allocated.
Yeah, so there wasn't like a cap put on the eastern area. It was like everywhere else, you trawled for suitable sites. And if they were available in that area, it could have had it. We'd look at the percentage figures and things later when we look at the spatial strategy tomorrow, but we can see how that is.
Yes, that's
okay.
Correct.
The district is quite highly constrained and the options available to the council are quite limited. You have the 74% A on B. You have the atomic establishment sites, which have about 12-kilometer.
Okay, understood. So I'll come on to those.
Options are limited to Newbury and to the main urban areas of Newbury and Thatcham.
Okay, thank you. Right. Another one that was suggested wasn't considered in the essay was meeting employment land needs in full.
Yes, so the council always planned to meet its needs in full in line with the NPPF. We didn't consider it was reasonable. And at the time of the plan we've been doing it, we thought we would be able to meet our need in full. So it wasn't considered a reasonable alternative to deliberately not meet it, if that makes sense. We were trying to meet our need. There just aren't the available suitable sites for allocation.
Well, we'll come on to the employment land supply later because there are points put that there are more sites that are deemed suitable by others. And I think they're in the A, O and B. I suppose the point is, well, could you not have had an alternative that was meet employment sites in full, specifically identified, meet employment needs in full, and then identify the best sites to do that, and then appraise that and conclude, on that basis that the benefits of meeting needs in full outweigh or don't outweigh the harm that would be caused to A and B or wherever else. Was it done explicitly like that, or was it just done on a site-by-site basis?
Yeah, it was done on a site-by-site basis of the sites that were available and considered to be suitable for allocation. And we have allocated all the sites that are considered to be suitable and appropriate for allocation for employment use.
Okay, so you didn't discount sites on the basis that they weren't needed, but you assumed that they were needed.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, so in effect, it was implicit that you were trying to find more sites, but you discounted them because the level of harm outweighed what you knew would be a benefit of meeting needs in full.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
I would add that employment is different to housing in terms of trying to find sites, and the employment sites which were submitted to the council were limited, but most of them were assessed through the housing and economic land availability assessment. And it's not like where you're looking for housing growth, it's normally an extension to a built-up area. Employment is different, has different considerations on the council. It's normally an extension to an existing employment site. So the council did consider all the reasonable alternative sites for employment.
Okay, thank you. Just a final one about the transparency of the lists of sites that were assessed. This was by site, in the different iterations of the sustainability appraisal. I think the point is it's not clear where they are. I've looked at there's the 2018 essay report and there's the 2022 essay report. They both have several appendices. Both include a full appendix, I think, of all the sites appraised. Is that so? There's a full comprehensive list in those two documents.
Yes, that's correct. Appendix 8A of the December 2020 version includes all the sites that were considered to be reasonable alternatives. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And finally, HELA Housing and Employment Land Availability Assessment 2023 has been referred to, which identifies more sites than were assessed. Is that, I'm not sure what the point is there. Is that subsequent to the plan being submitted, HELA 2023? Or did feed into the?
Yeah, so the essay looks at the sites that were available at submission for it, and
I think the HELA assessment was done before, at the same time as the submission of around the time of the submission of the plan.
So yes, that HELA is the most up to date and the most recent one.
And that did feed into the essay of the plan, of the submitted plan. This is a point made by Bell Cornwall's. They're now here, so I'm just trying to address it.
So the SEA takes any sites that were available up to November 2022. So that up to date HELA is not included in this because that was published after the proposed submission document was published.
Yes, that's what I thought.
So yeah, those.
So you didn't then appraise those. It was that's
No, so anything that's new in that one hasn't been appraised.
Some additional sites.
Okay.
So just to say it, so my colleagues just said it's the dates obviously don't necessarily match, but that yes, the sites in that HELA we knew about beforehand. So yes, they have been included in this version of the SEA. It's just to do with the date that the HELA was then published was after the date that this was published.
The main point being that if I want to look at all the sites that were appraised in the submission plan and the alternatives to them, it's in Appendix 8A of the 2022 essay report.
Yes, so 8A is all of Appendix 8 is the site. So in 8A is the
reasonable alternatives.
They're all the reasonable alternatives.
Yeah.
So 8A, B, and C include different sites in different categories, and so you need to look at all of them.
Okay, thank you. Right, I've not got any more questions about the sustainability appraisal to the council, so I'll see if others wish to make a comment. I'll come back to Mr. Pike, but I'm going to move on round and let some other people have a say. So Walker Logistics, I think I'll call you two, if that's okay.
Thank you, sir. And these comments are directed to the employment land issues. And sir, the starting point for this is the council's response to your question 1.4, which you'll find at council's document, paragraph 1.5, which directs you to the response that they gave to your preliminary question 21, which is exam 2. And so that question was, what were the reasonable alternatives considered during the preparation of the plan in terms of the amount of economic and other development to be accommodated? And the answer that the council gave on page 43 of their response to you, which is exam 2, under the heading economic and other development to be accommodated, they said this: the amount of development to be accommodated for these types of development, brackets economic and other, have been taken forward from the LPR evidence base. Now, they don't reference that, but I think that must be a reference to either EMP4, which is the original employment land review, or it's the update EMP11, and then they go on and say, and no reasonable alternatives were considered. So there seems to be acceptance by the council, at least in relation to employment land, that they have not, through the sustainability appraisal, undertaken, looked at any reasonable alternatives to simply carrying through the sites recommended through the employment land reviews, which they accept does not deliver all their need. We'll come to the numbers later on this afternoon. So that's the first point. The second point in relation to the sustainability appraisal arises in terms of their proposed modifications. So page 34 of the 2nd of May, proposed main modifications in relation to policy SP20. The proposal is that appropriate proposals for business development will be supported where they are located, and A, on sites allocated for business development in accordance with the individual site-specific policy, and that's ESA 1 through to ESA 6 in this plan. And then these are the important words, or any subsequent neighbourhood plan. So the council appears to now be promoting an alternative to its proposed proposals, which is that it will seek to allocate or meet its need, not through the local plan review, but through neighbourhood plans. Now, we would suggest there's a fundamental difficulty with neighbourhood plans seeking to allocate strategic employment sites, but more importantly, that is clearly a reasonable alternative, because indeed it's the course that they are promoting, which hasn't been assessed through the sustainability appraisal to date. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't now do it, but it flags up an issue with the existing sustainability appraisal, because it's clearly a reasonable option that they haven't assessed. And it is clearly something which, if they're going to take forward these main modifications, they will have to look at, because they themselves have identified it as a reasonable alternative, which they haven't yet assessed.
The points I think the council made was quite a simple one, really, that they went into this process of identifying what the employment land need is, which I don't think there's a great dispute about, and they went into it assuming that they'd wish to meet that need. That was the assumption. So they looked at all the sites that were put to them or as reasonable alternatives and allocated every one that it concluded on an assessment was suitable and deliverable. So the fact that it wasn't presented in the way that you're describing doesn't mean that it wasn't something that the council sought to do and identified the benefits and disbenefits of, does it?
Well, there are 2 points. There is obviously a transparency point in relation to the sustainability appraisal. And if that is the approach, then that clearly should have been set out. It hasn't been. But more importantly, and it's the second point that I've been making now, which is they are promoting a reasonable alternative, which is effectively meeting the need through allocations in neighbourhood plans. And that is not something that they have considered in the sustainability appraisal at all to date. Notwithstanding that they are now promoting that, not just as a reasonable alternative, but indeed their preferred approach, because it's a main modification.
Understood. Thank you. Provision.
So this is in relation to the affordable housing point. So in the plan at chapter 3, it obviously refers to addressing affordability as a key priority of the plan. It doesn't seem to be taken forward through into the sustainability appraisal. So looking at the 3 tested scenarios for housing delivery, they're all attributed a positive score under the objective of meeting housing need. However, obviously that's failing to consider the actual significant deficit against the affordable housing across the plan period. Obviously the knock-on potential social and economic consequences of that. So in terms of that, seems to me that they've missed an opportunity to address and maximise affordable housing, and eliminating that potential impact on the SA objective by not considering a reasonable alternative in terms of raising the overall housing need.
I think the council, I dealt with that point, I thought, and the council said they did. One of the alternative housing requirement figures in the preparation of the plan was a figure higher than local housing need, which would have had that effect that I think you're saying they should have appraised. Are you saying that they didn't do that, or they didn't identify, are you saying they didn't identify the benefits of it properly?
Yes, I think in terms of that significantly boosting supply that they talked about, I think they discounted it because the government were making changes to the planning system. It doesn't actually refer to, they discounted it on affordable housing need.
So you're not disputing that they did consider a higher figure than local housing?
Yes, yeah.
Was it considered?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Right, thanks. Could you turn your mic off if you've finished there? Right, town. Two towns.
Talk of the town. Talk of the town. Thank you very much, sir. So, first of all, I'd like to just come back on the council's response to you this morning in relation to the point that we were making, that in the sustainability appraisal, the sites that were formally allocated, which are all in Appendix 8A, they, in the sustainability appraisal, they assessed the policy. Whereas all of the sites that were assessed in 8B, the sites were assessed. And the most glaring example I think that I can give you about that relates to a site known as land adjoining Lynch Lane, which is in Lambourne. And if you, at your leisure, look at Appendix 8A, page 42 of 69, you will see, in response to question 9B, and 9B is the flood risk one, sir. And if you remember, that in fact appears right at the top of the table of the tables. Land adjoining Lynch Lane is a site which includes land in flood zone 1 and also flood zone 2. And it gets 2 positive stars in the sustainability appraisal because it's taking into account the policy and the mitigation, as it were, that is embedded in the policy. So it is treating the assessment of that site quite differently to the way that the assessment of sites in 8B is conducted. And it's simply not right. You quite rightly asked the question, were the reasonable alternatives all assessed against the same criteria? Well, they weren't, because, you know, 8A is looking at the policy, 8B is looking at the sites. 8A has got the mitigation embedded, 8B hasn't. And it's not an answer simply to say all the sites in 8A were identified in previous plans and the spatial strategy is the same. They need to look at all of the sites this time round on an equal basis. And they haven't done that. And so one of the things we quote in our representations is the case, the Hurd v. Broadland case, which makes the point that you've got to consider the reasonable alternatives on this in the same level of detail, on the same basis as you considered the others. So I'm afraid, as matters stand, their sustainability appraisal is fatally flawed, and they need to re-engage. And the second thing that I can say, and I think I'm unique in this position as I sit in this room, in answer to your question, it was said that where suitable sites were identified, they were allocated. Well, guess what, sir? Till 13 was not allocated. That was identified in positive ways, i.e. suitable, it passed all the HELAR tests, and it scores better than some of these sites in table 8A, and you're going to hear me harping on about Lynch Lane and Lambourne a little bit more later on. So they didn't actually allocate, in my case, a site which was demonstrated to be suitable.
If I understand the point about, you know, assessing all the reasonable alternatives the same, are they quite the same if they're a retained allocation? Is there not something about, does it not have a slightly different starting point if it's been carried forward from an existing?
I'm afraid the reason I've chosen Lynch Lane Lambourne as an example is because flood risk is an area, and perhaps again you can see it, the fact that they introduced flood risk later on in the sustainability appraisal process and underlines this. Matters have moved on since the core strategy, which after all started life before MPPF 2012, even though it was the first plan that was adopted just after 2012. So it's not good enough simply to say, because it's been allocated before, it gets immediately put into the box.
Understood. Although they could have saved the policy, couldn't they? But they didn't.
But they didn't.
No. Yeah. No, understood. Yeah. Okay, thanks. Nexus.
Thank you, sir. My point's really relating to, I suppose, the purpose of a sustainability appraisal and its role in as a tool in the iterative plan making process. The sustainability appraisal, this is the reference, the 22 study, when it looks at locations for growth, it identifies a number of strategic locations for growth, with focus of Thatcham being one of those locations. It's very clear that the evidence base supporting this strategic direction was the Thatcham growth study, which was commissioned as probably one of the earliest evidence bases for the plan moving forward. It was acknowledged that Thatcham hadn't taken growth historically in the core strategy due to high levels of growth historically. The core strategy inspector actually identified the need to look at Thatcham comprehensively as part of the review. The Thatcham growth study was carried out and it looked at options in Thatcham with a brief to look at potential options for 3,000 dwellings actually to expand Thatcham to improve its regeneration and sustainability. Referring to the conclusions of the Thatcham growth study, so I can refer you to SIT 3. I'm not going to go through it in detail, it's a very lengthy document, but in the conclusions of that Thatcham growth study, it summarises that the expansion of Thatcham at North East Thatcham, if undertaken in line with the framework in this report, could deliver significant benefits to the existing town and fulfil community objectives. The framework established would provide a strong basis for sustainable growth, tackling the key local growth issues and addressing wider sustainability and resilient development issues. This level of investment in infrastructure and service provision is only possible through such strategic growth with a comprehensive master plan and delivery strategy. It continues. Yeah. No, fine. I think the point I'm making, sir, is that the spatial strategy in the Regulation 18 plan was dictated to ostensibly by the growth identified in the growth strategy, identifying Thatcham as a location for growth, which was appraised at that stage. Moving forward, that spatial strategy was continued, but the growth levels in Thatcham were reduced significantly by truncating the North East Thatcham allocation. The benefits of a truncated North East Thatcham, as set out in the growth study, wouldn't deliver the overall benefits as set out in the growth strategy.
We're going to deal with all that.
Yeah.
What's the implication for the SA?
The implication of the SA is that there are sites in Thatcham which are accepted in terms of suitability for housing. Both the growth strategy and the council's 2050 vision identify suitable sites. There are sites that were discounted at the start of the process on the basis that they didn't form a suitable part of the strategic site. My point is that when you truncate the site to a much smaller strategic site, alternatives were not looked at in Thatcham, which looked at strategic site in addition to additional allocations which were suitable without having any major environmental impact.
Point being that once the decision had been made to not go for 2,500 at North East Thatcham, there should have been another iteration of a reasonable alternative
At
to
Thatcham.
think about more at Thatcham elsewhere again that had been
Correct.
discounted previously
That's the principal point.
Yeah, okay, understood. And that wasn't done at that point in the process later on when the scale of that site had been reduced. Okay, understood. Thank you. Right, Turley.
Morning, sir. Just to pick up a few points. I think from my perspective, we're dealing with the challenge of what the SA says against what the actual spatial strategy and the local plan provides for. And I think that's something we'll get into in the next few sessions. But focusing on the SA point for now, and particularly in terms of the spatial strategy part of the SA, and we've referred to it in our reps, but table 11 of the SA, which is on page 24, effectively predetermines as to whether there are available sites in Newbury being available to meet the identified housing need. And that's obviously right at the start of the SA process. And I think, as you're aware, sir, my client has interest in draft allocations, but also 2 emission sites at Newbury. Then in the SA, if you go into table 12, there's sort of further contradiction of this, saying that the council's preferred strategy, which is in effect some form of dispersal strategy, identifies a more sustainable, most sustainable outcome. But the reality is that the plan before you has no further allocations over and above retained allocations in Newbury at all. And for fear of diving into the numbers, if we exclude Thatcham allocation, there's only 209 additional dwellings proposed. Of those, 116 of those are proposed in the eastern area, with the balance in the National Landscape designation. So despite the SA saying that Newbury is the most sustainable location for growth, the plan simply fails to address that. Now, part of the issue I think we have around this is the SA has simply ignored documents and other information submitted at Reg 19 stage and before. And you've heard about the time and so the council turned this round. Simply were not reviewed, were not considered. The SA doesn't reflect the information for the sites. And I'm trying very carefully to avoid talking about emission sites for obvious reasons, but our clients put in a lot of information to address the SA that has simply not been updated to reflect it. And indeed, the SA in the case of one of our sites very clearly identifies it as a reasonable alternative. Yet, as we've heard, the Hurd versus Broadland case is very clear in terms of what is expected of the SA and the approach to reasonable alternatives. And effectively, we have an SA that's almost predetermining the outcomes. And a final point, so just, and again, we'll get into this afternoon, I'm sure, but there was a comment earlier about the spatial strategy being the same as previous plans. It's not. There were 4 spatial areas before, there are now only 3. So to rely on that, so it doesn't hold water, but we'll pick up on that later, I'm sure. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, just to be clear about something you said there about you and others, no doubt, put in lots of information about emission sites. At Reg 19, you're saying that hasn't been appraised.
No, sir. We reviewed the documents. There were comments in the SA about various technical aspects of the site, despite it actually having a positive scoring. We provided further clarity. There's no mention of those being considered and rolled into the submission version of the SA, and effectively the Reg 19 was the end of the process, and we heard that the employment side of things as well.
Yeah, okay. So it was well, isn't that because the council's point of view was they published what they thought was going to be the plan they wanted to submit at Reg 19, which and the SA was done at that point and stopped at that point, I think is what they've said. And therefore the information that's become available subsequently hasn't been assessed, but it will be if necessary through this process.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, sir. And in fairness to the council, time moves on,
Yeah,
obviously.
yeah,
I
yeah.
think the point we're trying to make here, though, is there are sites that were identified through the SA that scored positively that have not been taken forward, and development is proposed elsewhere.
Understood. And, you know, for the reasons of locational reasons in the government spatial strategies. Okay, well, we'll come back to all those things, no doubt, in due course. Right. So we're still on the SA. Let's go down this side now. So, yeah, Thatcham Town Council.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So my comment is similar to the one already made by Crowdace, that a number of sites were excluded at the HELAR because they were incapable. It was believed that they were incapable of providing the infrastructure that was required. And at that time, of course, Thatcham, the North East Thatcham was 2,500 houses with, among other things, an 8-form entry secondary school. So when the plan was the site was reduced, and it's acknowledged that the infrastructure that was as it could supply was reduced. No reconsideration was made of alternative sites in the light of the criteria by which they were rejected compared to North East Thatcham, and that also applies, I think, of not only to other sites in Thatcham but more widely across the area. I think it's also worth pointing out that at Regulation 18, the document was described as an interim sustainability appraisal. That was the title it was given. And that might have led people to believe that they had a future opportunity to comment, which would be taken into account, which has not materialised. Thank you.
Okay, Bucklebury.
Thanks, sir. Just following on from that point on North East Thatcham, the reference and what I'd like to take you to is table 30 of the SA, the 2022 SA. That's page 38. And that sets out the kind of decision-making kind of matrix options for quantum of development at North East Thatcham. And what Mr. Pike was saying at the time of Reg 18, you've got the up to 2,500 homes there, and that says that the option's not taken forward. The impacts would be too high, and sets that out. It then sets out that the option for 1,500 units. And in the summary of the SA, what it says there is overall development of this site is likely to give a neutral impact on all elements of sustainability. Now, we'll come to this, sir. I don't want to go through that, but we obviously disagree with that. But even within that table, it says clearly that the development may not be of a size to deliver a wider range of facilities to support Thatcham, such as new education facilities. And it says that in terms of discussion, it says that it's noted that compared to a higher number of dwellings, this option may not be deliver the education provision envisaged. And the reduced number of on site is considered to be more appropriate. So that then comes back to how the council could say that it's a neutral impact on sustainability, given that we know around delivery of that. But furthermore, our point is that after testing 1,500 homes, and the council at the bottom of that summary say that the scale of the site will mean that more additional sites will need to be allocated across the district, and you've heard on emission sites that are available. We say that the council should have considered, again, a lower amount of units also as a reasonable alternative at Thatcham. They went down to 1,500, but there's no evidence that they then looked at, well, what would happen if it went to, say, 750? What would that mean in terms of provision of infrastructure? We know that it can't deliver, and we're not suggesting that it could, but equally there are other sites that were available to the council, and the fact that that wasn't considered, we say, is a failing.
Understood. Okay. Does the council want to come back on those points? In particular, the one I think, Ben, about the unequal assessment of the allocations carried forward, given that you know, circumstances will have changed since those allocations were made, and well, but yeah, you've got the point, I think so.
Yeah, so those sites that had already been allocated had been subject to SASEA previously as part of the general set of sites. And in the
Sorry, what do you mean previously?
So when the housing site allocations DPD was produced, all those sites were considered and essayed in that. I know that's not part of this, but they have been subject to essay.
And they were found sound.
And they were.
That's, I don't think that's
Yeah.
the point, is it? The point is that.
And so based on that, that is why those sites which had been confirmed as still deliverable by the site promoters, that's part of that appendix to the housing background paper, were carried forward. There was no reason for the council not to consider them to still be the most suitable and deliverable sites. That's why they've been taken forward as they are. And therefore not subject to reassessment through the essay process as part of a collection of sites to be allocated because they had already been considered to be suitable for allocation.
Okay, if that understood the position, in which case shouldn't you just have saved them rather than carried them forward as allocate, you know, superseding the previous plans and including them as allocations in this plan? Because you chose to do that, didn't that then therefore mean that they're back in the same pot as every other site? No, okay, well.
I don't have an answer to that at the moment.
No,
but I can,
okay,
we
anyway,
can get one if
you've explained what was done and why,
Yeah.
understood. We'll have a think about that. Okay, carry on, sorry.
So in terms of the spatial strategy, so that covers both the discussions and the points made about Newbury and North East Thatcham. The spatial strategy was assessed prior to anything else being done. And those options were set out as to where the spatial strategy would focus development. The essay sets out those options in table 12, which includes continuing with the spatial strategy that we had, increasing focus in the eastern area, reducing it in A, O and B, now the national landscape, continuing the focus on Newbury as per before, and then a focus on Thatcham. And through that process, the focus on Thatcham was decided to be the most appropriate solution to be taken forward. And it was as a result of that the Thatcham Growth Study was then commissioned to look at where development in Thatcham would be most appropriate. And a range of sites were looked at and different options were taken forward. Only one of those was considered to be a reasonable alternative. The details for that are set out on page 25 of the essay report.
We'll look, when we do the North East Thatcham allocation day, we'll look at the reasonable alternatives again specifically about that. But do you want to just think about that general point about when the decision was made to reduce from 2,500 to 1,500 when you prepared the Reg 19 plan? Why was there not another iteration of the essay at that point about, you know,
Yes.
I think that's the main point of something like.
Okay, so we still considered that the spatial strategy was the same. That wasn't going to change as a result of considering changing numbers on that site. And at 1,500, the site is still considered to be of strategic level to provide comprehensive infrastructure alongside the site and on the site. So this change in that quantum of development still sits within that spatial strategy. There were no other reasonable alternatives for strategic level of development within Thatcham or anywhere else across the district. So there weren't any other reasonable alternatives to consider for that. And while there are other sites in Thatcham, they don't individually or in combination with others provide an opportunity for strategic level development. They're not close enough together, and we wanted to provide as much infrastructure on the site to make it as a cohesive a development as possible.
We can come back to that, but the basic point being going from 2,500 to 1,500 at a strategic spatial strategy level didn't make a difference from the council.
No, it didn't. And part of that reduction was in response to comments made at Reg 18 about too much development. So it didn't seem appropriate then to consider another site in Thatcham to make up the balance.
Thanks, that's good. Anything else on SA before?
I think we've answered all the questions previously, unless there's anything you want clarification on.
If there is, I'll reflect and I'll come back on it. Okay. Right, we're yes, it's 11:10 now. We're going to break in a minute, but just before I do, I'm just going to say that I haven't got any questions about the habitat regulations assessment. It's been done, and we can deal with the policy implications and the mitigations that identifies as necessary as we go through. I don't think there's any significant suggestion that it didn't comply with the legal requirements, and Natural England are content with the process and its findings, and insofar as the mitigations, we'll deal with those later. So unless anyone's got anything. There's a general point about ecology that Bucklebury Parish Council make in relation, but that we'll deal with that under the relevant sites. So nothing on that. This is just to make me feel better at the coffee break, using through these. Climate change, there's a legal requirement for plans to include policies that contribute to the mitigation of adaptation to climate change. And the plan does do that, and they've been identified by the council. And insofar as there are soundness issues relating to those policies, we'll deal with those as we go through the examination. So I have not got any questions about the legal compliance of the plan, identifying, including such policies. I don't think anyone else has made any points about that. So that ticks that one off. So we'll break now. It is 11:10, so we'll break now until 11:30. So I think there are refreshments available in the cafe. You know where the toilets are downstairs. So we can adjourn there and we'll resume at 11:30, please. Thank you. We've got to issue 1.7 on the agenda, which is flood risk. And again, this is something we can come back to on site-specific sessions as necessary. But this question was about whether in preparing the plan, the council had applied national policy correctly in terms of applying the sequential test, and then if necessary, the exception test relating to flood risk during the preparation of the plan, which national policy is quite clear that development should not be allocated if there are reasonably alternative sites appropriate for the proposed development in areas with lower risk of flooding. So in a sense, that means, you know, when you're choosing allocations, if all things being equal, or at least or there are reasonable alternatives that are suitable, you should be looking at the lower risk ones before any others. So the council responded to an early question of mine, a preliminary question of mine, which was asking about the application of the sequential test and whether the allocations had been properly chosen in that respect. And the council's response basically said, while some of the allocations in the plan contain areas that are at risk of flooding, the development proposed on each can be accommodated outside those areas. So I think what the council's saying, I'll just check this, that none of the development proposed in the plan would be on an area at risk of flooding based on the assessments that the flood risk assessment that's been carried out. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Right, so there might be an area of risk of flooding within the allocation, but you don't need to build on it to achieve the layout and the number of dwellings that have been, or the amount of development that's been proposed on the site.
That's correct.
Okay,
So we've
fine.
taken a sequential approach to the location of development.
Okay, thank you. So the point has been put that there are some omission sites that are allocated, that are not allocated, which are in fact lower risk of flooding than some of the allocations that are partially at risk of flooding. So is your response that the sites that are partially at risk of flooding, it doesn't matter because the buildings won't be on those bits? Is that the council's position?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, we'll come back and see what others say about that. So the development is not at a higher risk of flooding than they would be on a different site. Okay.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Anything else that you want to say? I mean, you know, you've explained, we know what the evidence is, we know what the assessments are, we know what you say about the allocations. That's fine. We'll see what others want to say about that. And I think, I don't know whether, yeah, do you want to explain? You've heard what the council say. We know what your point is. Well, no, explain what your point is.
Thank you very much, sir. I would like to just begin by drawing attention to the evidence base, if I may, because I think there is a difference of approach between what you see in WAT 5, which is the January 2023 council authored sequential test, and in particular, paragraph 3.4 of that document identifies all the criteria which fed into the identification of the low risk, as compared to what JBA said in their document, WAT 2A, that is the Strategic Flood Risk Assessment 1. In particular, what they said about the aim of the sequential test in paragraph 5.1 of WAT 2A, when they said that basically the aim of the sequential test is to keep development outside areas of medium and high risk, which I understood them to be saying outside medium, flood zone 2, high, flood zone 3. In other words, you know, you should be keeping it in flood zone 1. And as you know, I'm till 13 in flood zone 1. And as you will know from the appendix to my representations, we have identified a number of sites which are in flood zone 1 and flood zone 2. And so and indeed there's an element of flood zone 3 in one of them. And so there is a point here about on a straightforward application of the sequential test? Why have they allocated sites ahead of me, as it were, without allocating me in flood zone 1? So that essentially is where I'm coming from. But when you actually look at 3.4 of their sequential test document, they say that for sites to be at low risk, the sites have to meet the following conditions. And this is what this is the council's internal work. So they say, first of all, the site is within flood zone 1. And then the next criteria is the site is not within flood zone 3 plus climate change. And I'm thinking to myself, there's a big gap between, it's flood zone 2 in between, and they appear to have allocated sites in flood zone 2. So I actually think that the council's application of the sequential test is inconsistent with their own external consultants' report, and it's also inconsistent with the MPPF, and therefore it's unsound.
This is the assessment that you did in terms you've identified some of the allocations that
Yes.
you say are at that include flood zone 2
Yes.
and a bit of flood zone 3, I think. But the flood zone 2 issue, has your assessment identified the extent to which those allocations are flood zone 2 and whether the development proposed could be accommodated outside the flood zone 2, i.e. on flood zone 1?
We haven't done
No.
site-specific analysis, as it were, of each of these other sites. And I've heard the council's answer, sir, but when you look at the evidence base, where, please, is the evidence included in the plan? Where is there any kind of mapping or anything which actually shows that they have dug down, identified the extent of the areas which are in flood zone 2, and where is the evidence that they have satisfied themselves that they can bring forward development only within flood zone 1, setting aside my complaints about, the SA, the way that it, back to my 8A, 8B point. I don't see the evidence there, but we did, sir, insofar as what we did was just look at the percentages of the site. We didn't actually look at layouts.
In terms of percentages then, I mean, I can look it up, but just what's the, if you took the worst allocation in terms of percentage, high percentage of flood zone 2, what sort of percentage are we talking about?
Well, I think I've got RSA 14, which is flood zone 1 and flood zone 2. I haven't got a percentage to give you there. I've got RSA 18, the Purbright Institute, which is in flood zone 1, 2, and would you believe it, also 3. I've got RSA 19, land west of Spring Meadows, the clue is in the name. 25% of that site is in a groundwater emergency zone. RSA 11, the former sewage treatment works, 27% of that site is in flood zone 2, and that 27% is our figure, which our engineers have identified.
Okay, so
RSA 20, 17%, that's at risk of surface water flooding, is what the council identified. Those are the only percentages that I've been able to extract from our evidence and the council's evidence.
Okay, but the other point you're making is, well, it's up to the council to demonstrate and provide the evidence that clarifies this.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. Any other comments before I come back and ask the council to respond specifically to that? No. Okay. Do you want to deal with that? So a number of allocations there that are referred to. A number of questions, I suppose. One, did the SFRA do the mapping and did it identify, the percentages and show where these different levels of flood risk are on the different allocations?
Yes, so the level 1 SFRA includes a series of appendices, and those include maps. Oh, sorry, apologies. So just to repeat that, so if you didn't hear it, so the SFRA includes numerous several appendices, and those include flood risk maps. And I'd also draw your attention, I think it's to Appendix 1 of the SFRA that looks at the proportion of the sites within it, like flood zones.
You said to me earlier, and you said in your response to my preliminary question, that all of the development can be accommodated on, I should have been more specific with my question, I can't remember what the question was, outside areas at risk of flooding, I think. You mean that the development could be accommodated on flood zone 1?
Yeah, that's
not
correct.
on flood zone.
And
None of the proposals that involve building on flood zone 2?
No, none at all. And what we've done in these site-specific policies, we've been very clear that no development should take place in those areas at risk of flooding. So I've got here, let's see. So for example, policy RSA 10, which regards White Hart Meadow, its criterion, is it H? No development will be permitted within flood zone 2, including highly vulnerable development.
Okay, thank you. Right, so from the council's point of view then, the national policy requirement to allocate sites that are at lower risk of flooding to, you're only comparing reasonable alternatives. That doesn't mean just because you've got a site that's all flood zone 1, it has to be allocated before a site that's partially flood zone 2 or partially flood zone 3 and partially flood zone 1, if you can put the development on the bit that isn't at risk of flooding.
That's correct. And I think I'll just draw your attention to the diagram 2 in the planning practice guidance. And it's a flow map. And the first one is, point of the flow map is, can development be allocated in areas of low flood risk, both now and in the future? Then S for A, and then yes, sequential test passed.
Yes, there's lots of stuff in the PPG, isn't there? Yeah. Right, okay. Do you want to respond, or do you want to?
I mean, just to say, this is really going to be quite problematic, I predict, because I appreciate, sir, that you are sitting here examining the plan under the old planning practice guidance. But when the council comes to determine planning applications, they're going to be looking at this under the 2022 planning practice guidance. And there is quite a material difference between the two. And that is another thing that has not been grappled with. And one of the things that you will need to ensure is that there is clarity as to whether the application of the sequential test under the old planning practice guidance is going to be good enough for planning application purposes, because I don't think it will be. The planning practice guidance in 2022 is much clearer that the application of the sequential test is more than flood zone 1, 2, and 3. It is also looking at surface water. And so that's another quite a major issue. And I appreciate you'll have to look at this when you get into the nitty-gritty of each of the sites.
Okay. Well, I think my recollection was that the NPPF always talked about all types of flooding. It wasn't just flood zones 1, 2, and 3. It was surface water and other forms of flooding as well. So do you want to respond to that? Did the SFRA
And so
tackle?
the sequential test, it covers all sources of flooding. And I'll just again draw attention to I think it's Appendix A of the sequential test report.
Okay, right. Well, thank you. We can look. Well, if necessary, we will look at individual allocations about this. But I think the council's been quite clear, and the policies are in fact quite clear that the development that's proposed would have to be accommodated on flood zone 1 within the allocations. So, thank you. Right. Okay. Any other points on flood risk? If not, we'll move on. Thank you. We've got an eclectic mix of issues this morning, haven't we? The next one is about strategic policies and neighbourhood plans. And the reason that I asked this question is because NPPF was revised, whenever it was revised, some years ago, and it made clear that plans had to identify the difference between what are strategic policies and which are non-strategic policies. And the implication for that is, as far as I know, the only implication for that is, and it's not actually stated in the NPPF clearly, but is that neighbourhood plans have to be in general conformity with the strategic policies. So the question I had was, well, first of all, did the council identify what are strategic policies and which are not? And clearly the plan does do that. I think the question I asked was, well, did you decide that on the basis of the criteria in the PPG etc. And you said, yes, you did. And I think you're satisfied that subject to the deletion of some policies that are duplicative and therefore you don't need them, and we can deal with that as and when. But the substance of those policies have been fed into other bits of the plan anyway, so you end up the same thing, but in slightly simplified form, I think, is the first point. So anyway, just to be, and various comments from participants have questioned whether some of the policies that are identified by the council as strategic are sound, and that is something we'll come back to. I don't think necessarily that's quite the issue that I'm trying to grapple with here. So just to give the council a final chance, you're satisfied that the policies you've identified as strategic are strategic, and you're also satisfied that there aren't other policies in the plan that you would want neighbourhood plans to be in general conformity with. You've got the balance right between the two.
Yes, and I'll just refer you to our response to preliminary question 13.
Okay, thank you. Right. Does anybody wish to say anything about this? Walker Logistics.
Yes, thank you, sir. In a sense, it's repeating a point I made in terms of sustainability assessment, and my comments are really directed at policy SP 20. So we'll come to the numbers in due course, but no one is disputing there's a significant shortfall in terms of allocated sites and the requirement for employment land. And I drew your attention earlier this morning to the proposed modification by the council to try and deal with that, which at least in part, is to say, well, we will leave it to neighbourhood plans to allocate strategic employment sites in the borough. And given that strategic policies are intended, in accordance with the NPPF paragraph 20, to set out an overall strategy for the pattern, etc., and make sufficient provision for, amongst other things, employment, the notion that you are going to leave it to the uncertain process of neighbourhood plans, which by definition are not strategic and are parochial, is quite frankly ludicrous. That is not a strategic policy. That is avoiding taking the hard decisions in terms of a strategic policy and backing it to an uncertain parochial process.
Okay, I mean, neighbourhood plans can allocate employment sites, can't they? There's nothing, leaving aside, I know you're concerned you can't necessarily rely on it, and you can't necessarily deal with strategic sites through a neighbourhood plan, but there's nothing in the legislation or national policy that would prevent a neighbourhood plan allocating a site. And if not, does not SP 20 as modified just recognise that fact? It's not.
Yes, so you're right. There is nothing to stop a neighbourhood plan identifying an employment site. But when you have the scale of need that has to be delivered outside of the allocated sites, the idea that neighbourhood plans can deliver that sort of quantity of employment land is just simply not realistic. The nature of neighbourhood plans themselves cannot deliver the kind of employment sites, either in terms of their location or in terms of their size, that this council has to deliver.
Okay, no, understood. It's a matter we'll come back to when we look at the overall employment land supply, and whether the plan does all that it should and could in terms of allocating sites. But I think the council's position, well, no, I won't deal with that now. SP 20, we'll come back to that. Okay. So, and there's nothing else anybody wishes to say about this technical issue about identifying strategic policies. So we'll move on. Thank you. The next one, yeah, sorry, under this same issue, which is issue 1.8 still, but I had another question, which was simply about the plan as submitted, including Appendix 6, which I asked a question about, and the council had another think about it and decided, well, no, we don't want that. It doesn't it doesn't really serve a purpose because that's dealt with elsewhere, and also it's not actually accurate and up to date. So you deleted Appendix 6, you proposed to delete Appendix 6, and that's fine. That information can be set out elsewhere in a better format. So I've got nothing to say about that. I don't think anybody else seems to have. Which brings me on to another technical issue about the role of the plan and its relationship with the previously adopted plans. We've already, this is about whether because the regulations require that policies in a local plan must be consistent with the adopted development plan, unless the plan being examined contains a policy that is intended to supersede another policy in the adopted plan, and the new plan states that fact and identifies a superseded policy. So I think, going back to what we were talking about earlier, just to be absolutely clear about this plan would supersede all of the policies in the adopted core strategy and the site allocations DPD. So this plan would, freestanding, all the old stuff would have gone. But no, and that's what you wanted to be clear about. Yep.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So, and you proposed a modification to Appendix 7 just to make that a bit clearer, because I think there was some ambiguity in the way it had been written about some retained allocations not being carried forward or whatever. So the modifications you proposed make it absolutely clear all of the previous policies, including some allocations, have been superseded by policies in this new plan.
That's right.
Yeah. And the other consequence of that, as we've already heard, is that the allocations that were previously in the plan, in previous plans, have been put into this plan. They're in there as a allocation. They're not a commitment, they're an allocation. And we've had a discussion about the implications of that for their assessment against reasonable alternatives. Yep.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, right. I've never really quite understood whether it is actually my role to consider whether the council's superseding the right policies or not. But it seems to me it's a matter, it should be entirely for the council to decide which policies it has. But anyway, in this case, it's fairly straightforward because everything's superseded. There's nothing that's being clung on to. So everything's up, this new plan is up for grabs, and all the allocations are. Okay, any points or questions that people have about that one? No. Which brings us on to another issue that is, it's not uncommon. In fact, it's quite common for plans policies to refer to supplementary planning documents and other guidance and material, which can be helpful because it can either signal an intention to produce something that's going to provide more detailed guidance for how to implement policy, and sometimes it can refer to an existing document that contains guidance and information. But national policy is clear that supplementary planning documents and other things they can be material considerations in decision making, and they can provide more detailed advice, but they don't form part of the development plan, and they can't introduce new planning policies. So it's important the way such documents are expressed. And I raised the question with the council, and the council went through all of the references and all the policies and provided an update to say that they thought that either it was appropriate, and they gave a reason why it was appropriately expressed. It wasn't, for example, tying, in most cases, developers to be in accordance with something that lies outside the development plan. It was asking them to have regard to or to respond to such material. So from the council's point of view, you satisfied that that all those references are appropriate now and justified to all of the things that are in the.
We are, yes.
Yeah, okay. So we'll deal. Yeah, can I just go through my questions and then we'll come on to that. So insofar as they crop up in individual site allocations, we can deal with them as we go along. But I just wanted to pick a couple of examples, if I could, to see how actually this would work in practice and what the references mean. So I've got two examples, and these are about landscape capacity assessments and landscape sensitivity capacity assessments, which are in the evidence document, evidence base for the plan. So they're bits of work that were carried out at various times during the preparation of the plan. And if we take, for example, RSA 2, which is a site at Bath Road, Newbury, the policy states that the site will be developed in accordance with the LCA 2015. That's how it's expressed in the policy, I think. I'll let you tell me if I got that wrong. I didn't make a note of which part, but it says the site will be developed in accordance with the LCA 2015. Is that correct? Yeah. So I looked at the examination library, the list of documents LAN 1 to LAN 8, and I couldn't actually see a document that was LCA 2015 that includes this site. But I may have missed it. You don't necessarily have to, we can come back to this when we look at the sites, but I just wanted to flag this up. Because it's just an example of how these things may or may not work effectively.
Just need to check the examination library, I think, yes. Yeah.
The second one, so that's a factual thing, whether there is or isn't a document that relates to the site. I mean, maybe I missed it. The next example I had was, again, to do with landscape assessment. RSA 11, Thiel, the former sewage treatment works. This again requires development to be in accordance with, and this time it refers to the Landscape Sensitivity and Capacity Assessment 2021, which I did find, I think, which is LAN 7C. So I could trace that through to a document. So I looked at that document, thinking about, well, if I was preparing an application, how would I ensure that I was in accordance with this thing? And I looked at it, and it summarises relevant evidence and designations around the site for landscape, assesses visual and landscape sensitivity, and it assesses the site's relationship with the wider landscape and townscape. And it concludes that, taking account of the adjoining allocation, RSA 10 White Hart Meadow, which refers to the provision of green infrastructure linking the site and a buffer with the A&B on the undevelopable area beyond the pylons. And then figure 2 shows an area within the allocation that is indicated as having potential for development and an area inappropriate for development. So those words and those pictures, is it clear what in accordance with that document means? Is it being prescriptive about the developable area, undevelopable area that's traced back in that landscape assessment document? Is that what's the plan is saying in effect?
I think that's where we're, that's where we have the, in B, we have the criteria underneath where we say about in accordance with the landscape sensitivity and capacity assessment. We pull out the main recommendations of the landscape work. And so that those by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are in place. So we're trying to put it into the actual policy and the site boundary. I think generally across the RSAs, we tried to keep it to the developable area. So yeah, we think the plan.
So when you look at the red line and you read the sub-criteria to that requirement to be in accordance with the landscape sensitivity assessment, it's clear. You're saying you think it's clear because you pulled out the key things that you need to do to achieve that in accordance with.
Indeed.
And the red
I think
line.
we probably will talk about Thiel in the Thiel anyway. But yes, I think we are.
Okay. So you're content that that's an effective approach. But given that you've put, I mean, it seems to me that if you've got policy requirements that are from, I mean, they're justified by the landscape assessment, but if they're policy requirements, they're quite properly put into the policy, which I think you're saying you've done. Why then you need to be in accordance with the landscape assessment? Not quite sure, but okay, we can think about that. Going back to the, did you have a chance to look at the early one? Is it just something I overlooked, or is it just this RSA 2 and the?
It had a different reference. It was new 042, a new 42, sorry. Sorry, 042.
Well, sorry, what was the reference?
NEW 042.
So that wasn't a LAN reference, it was another document that was,
The site itself, so I think you were
Okay.
talking about the RSA policy, was RSA 2.
yeah.
But actually it was in the landscape assessment work, it was.
Oh, sorry, it is a different name there.
Yeah, it was new Article 2.
Right, yeah. Okay, well, it's rather warm in here, actually. Do the windows open? Oh,
We can arrange that. We need to get somebody to.
right, okay, well, maybe at lunchtime then. We can stay awake till then. Any other? Yeah, and okay, so anything else you want to say about this references to other documents and things in policies? At the risk of preempting anything, Thatcham growth study, we'll deal with that on another day. But the principle of and the way that the plan refers to such supporting information, SPD, other guidance, etc. Any comments about that? I'll start with Bucklebury, then I'll go on, Mr. Pike.
Well, it was on Thatcham growth study, so, but just to keep it at a very high level, I mean, obviously the Thatcham growth study is referenced directly in the policy wording for SP 17. It's not in the justification text. And I think there's two issues. I think it's just the status of the Thatcham strategic growth study, whether it's an SPD or just an evidence-based document. I think it's an evidence-based document. There's no impression that it's an SPD or an SPG, but we'll probably come back to this and maybe just laying a marker down. But that Thatcham strategic growth study says 2,500 units. And you have a policy that says the Thatcham strategic growth study provides guiding principles for the delivery of the site. So I think that is an inherent conflict in the way that deals with that. You know, I think we do need to put that front and centre at this stage.
Well, we'll come back. Let's hold on to the site-specific issues, Thatcham, because we've got time to deal with that. I mean, there's a modification proposed to remove that from the policy, but we'll deal with that when we come to it. Mr. Pike, of Thatcham Town Council.
Thank you. Yes, so we share the view on Bucklebury, but my reason for seeking to speak was the Vision 2050, which the council proposes to add certainly to SP 17 and I think elsewhere through a main modification, and that also conflicts in a different way with the policy. So we'll have to come back to that on.
There are items under that issue, isn't there, to deal with all those references and many other things. Any other comments on this issue about the reference to other documents and guidance? No, okay. But the council is satisfied, including with the reference to these landscape assessments. So maybe I'll be satisfied too. Definitions, the plan at Appendix 9 includes definitions. And I asked I'll just pause while the right. Maybe we should set the tables up in the garden for this afternoon. Right, yeah, so Appendix 9 includes definitions, and I asked the council to double check those with the definitions of the NPPF, which it did, and it's satisfied that they're all consistent, and there's some others that are being amended to make sure they are, and then there are some specific terms in the plan that are defined in the appendix. So you're happy that everything in it is consistent with national policy, and that it includes everything in it that it needs to make sure the plans, the policies in the plan are effective in terms of being understandable with the terms they use, yeah?
We are.
Yeah, okay. I don't think anyone's picked up any, yeah, Mr. Pike.
Thank you. Well, this is with my hat of the Local Access Forum that public rights of way include byways as well as public footpaths and bridleways, so that definition needs to be amended. Thank you.
That's the definition in the appendix that.
Yeah.
Yes. What's the definition of?
The definition
public rights of way.
Public rights of way, and it needs to include byways as well as public footpaths and bridleways as stated there. Thank you. That's a technical correction, but for us important.
You've been very systematic in your analysis of the plan, Mr. Pike. Yeah, can you note that, council?
Council will be happy to
look
look
at
at
down
that.
as an additional modification.
we can look at that as a minor modification, yes.
Right. Two more issues. It is a real rag bag, isn't it, this morning? This is viability. Again, this is just to look at this in sort of a strategic level about the work that was done about the evidence. And we'll come back to it when we look at individual sites and individual policies indeed about what the viability assessment does in terms of the evidence that it uses and the assessment it makes of those things, and also what it tells us about the viability or otherwise. The key thing, you can look at individual policies and obviously there could be costs associated with those, but the importance of this plan-wide assessment is to think about what the cumulative impact of all the requirements in the plan is and how it affects the deliverability of the plan and in terms of the viability. So as I say, we'll look at some specifics later throughout the examination. I've just got a few questions to raise now, and they may be just to flag up. So you maybe need to do something to think about, and when we come back, if they're not resolved today. So first of all, the basic point that you did the viability assessment during the preparation of the plan. The last report that was published when the plan was finalised for Reg 19, it used costs and values based on data from 2021 and 2022. That's because that was presumably what was up to date when that report was written. So I suppose the question is it still up to date now for my purposes of examining the plan? Does the council have any understanding of significant changes to costs and values since then that would suggest that the VA needed updating or new?
No, that's considered to be the appropriate position to take with the information that's in there. There's nothing significant that warrants a full update of that at the moment that we're aware of.
Is that because you've thought about it and looked at the costs and values that were used in 2021, 2022 data, and you've looked at what there is now, and they're not so significantly different to make you have to rework the whole VA exercise? Or is it just that you think, well, we did it then and that's fine?
So my understanding is that our viability consultants have reviewed it, and the comments back of it, it doesn't need to be a complete review.
Thank you. That clarifies the position. That's helpful. Thank you. I'll raise these issues now, but we can come back to it. It's about DM4, energy efficiency, which is going to be an interesting discussion, isn't it? So the new written ministerial statement talks about robust evidence to justify any local standards in terms of energy efficiency. And obviously there was evidence and assumptions were made about the costs of this policy. So I just wanted to clarify some things which I think the HBF have pointed out aren't clear in the way it's set out in the evidence. Two things, and Mr. Baring can add to this or if he wishes, but the assessment refers to 5% increase in costs to reflect this policy requirement for higher energy efficiency standards. But the HBF says it's not clear if that 5% increase is against the 2013 or the 2021 building regs. Because what they say is that their understanding is it should be above the 2021 regs, which obviously are higher standards than the 2013. So that's the first technical one. And it doesn't particularly matter if we can't answer it today, because you can then make a note and we can deal with it when we deal with that policy. And then the second point is that the cost of carbon offsetting, which the HBF suggests could be between £1,000 or £3,000 per home, doesn't seem to be, or it's not clear if it's been factored in or not. So those are 2 points. If you think you can answer them now, please do. If not, we can come back to them.
We will need to come back to those, yes.
Yeah, okay. Right. Again, this is something we can come back to when we look at North East Thatcham, so I don't want to get down in the detail, but the town council say that there seems to be some inconsistencies between the assumptions made in the viability assessment work for the costs of the infrastructure, etc., and the requirements of and the things that are actually set out in SP 17, i.e. what the viability assessed isn't the same necessary list of infrastructure projects. So note that and can come back to it. Unless you want to say anything there now.
No, sir, we'll come back to that. Thank you.
Fine, okay. So I'll invite comments. Mr. Barron, do you want to just say anything? If there's anything else I missed or if I misinterpreted what you were saying, but please speak
No,
up.
so you didn't misinterpret. I'm happy to come back to those issues, obviously, when we talked about DM4. I think it's important that the costs are updated where necessary to ensure that you have a clear position as to the viability of both policies and the plan in general. I think another point that this is a point I didn't actually raise with my statements, sir, with regard to BNG as well. I believe the council have been using the impact assessment from 2019 in terms of the cost related to BNG, and I think that also has a 50% on-site and 50% off-site, and the costs related to off-site deliver about £11,000 within that. As we go through and our members are seeing more evidence as to those costs, we're actually seeing those costs around about £30,000 to £50,000 per credit and per biodiversity unit. So quite a significantly higher cost than they're set out in the impact assessment, which is now some 5 years old with regard to when that was published. So I think it would need to look back and see actually what are the costs relevant within that study. Are they appropriate to the costs in terms of the credits that would be required on allocations on other sites with regard to BNG and ensuring the 10% can be met? So thank you.
Just to be clear, what you said there on biodiversity net gain, did you say that the VA assumed an £11,000 per dwelling?
My understanding, no, not per dwelling.
No.
It's with regard to the offset credits. So in terms of the impact assessment, they used the central, the government used a central assessment, and that central assessment had a consideration of 50% on-site delivery of that 10%, whatever net gain was required, and a 50% off-site. And the off-site credit within that was about £11,000 per credit biodiversity unit, as it were, to offset as part of that. But what we're finding now is those credits are higher in terms of what the market is charging for those with regard to those credits, and it's around about 30 to 50,000 we're seeing. But over time, we'd expect that to come down. But I think it needs to be reflected that those costs potentially too low within the viability assessment, if it is based on the impact assessment, which I believe the council's evidence suggests it is. So I think potentially clarification as we go through with regards to that point would be helpful.
Yeah, okay. Did you get a note of that about the cost of the biodiversity net gain credits? Having latest evidence from the HBS point of view suggests they're higher than the VA, so maybe it's another one for us for them to check. Okay. Right. Yeah, Litchfields. I may as well clear this up now because this is something that's going to, Mr. Spry, you. Yeah. I'll give you the opportunity. There's been, I think in your Matter 1 statement, you seem to suggest that, maybe paraphrasing this, it may be what others have interpreted you to have said, that more than 1,500 homes are needed at North East Thatcham to deliver all the necessary infrastructure. When your statement for the North East Thatcham site, the later matter, it didn't say that, I don't think, and it talked about there being, more development delivering more infrastructure. Can we just be clear what your position is now, so that when we come to it, we're clear? Can the 1,500 homes deliver all of the policy requirements in policy SP 17, including all the infrastructure that is proposed there?
I think the excuse me, the position is that it's around the scale of infrastructure. So some of the specific requirements in the policy as submitted around the space and scale of infrastructure and school provision, for example, wouldn't be supported by 1,500 homes, but a 2,500 would be. And therefore the main modifications that we were proposing were that the scale of infrastructure requirements be proportionate to the scale of development and subject to feasibility work and the master planning process.
Okay.
So in essence, and it goes to what was the way the SA correctly treated the difference between 2.5 and 1,500, which was that you get less infrastructure for 1,500, and that's because the policy requirements would have to flex proportionate to the scale of development.
So if you take the example of a secondary school, if this policy, SP17, is proposing a package of development that has to all stand or fall, it has to, you need its entirety. And if a secondary school has to be a minimum size and it's going to serve not just the site but a wider catchment as it would do, the policy requires that to be provided, even though it's not all needed. You know, in terms of the Section 106 sort of obligation that you would be required to meet the needs arising from your development, it would be more than that. So you're saying that as a developer of 1,500 homes, you would only be able to provide the funding for the bits that your development needs. Is that basically it?
Yes, that's correct. And there's a long-standing approach in the policy, which is to provide the land and then to make a financial contribution proportionate to the scale of the development. And self-evidently, that contribution will be greater at 2.5 than it will at 1,500.
We'll work out how the details of all that works, but
sorry.
Yeah,
And what the policy includes within it is that the nature and cost and the specific contribution will be subject to a feasibility study, which will take into account the local education authority's position in terms of the form of school provision that would actually be provided on the site. And that specific form of provision is not yet established in the policy or the evidence base.
But if the package included 2,500 homes, are you saying that the developer of those homes could contribute more than would be just to provide the space for the children from those 2,500 homes? It could actually fund the full school, or the position still be the same? You'd only do a proportionate contribution.
Well, I mean, in terms of the it'll be a proportionate contribution because, in a sense, it would be mitigating the impacts of the development. And over the period in which North East Thatcham has been considered by the council, the local education authority has had sort of views about the role that a new school at North East Thatcham, how that might sit within the network of existing school provision, how that might, for example, relate to existing school provision in Thatcham and elsewhere. That process needs to conclude in terms of the feasibility study that's required by the policy. But the basic principle is we provide a site that's sufficient size for the school that the education authority wants to be provided, and the financial contribution necessary to meet the specific educational requirements of the development.
That same principle, do you say, would apply irrespective of the scale of the development? It would always be the house builders would contribute based on a formula for how many children they would be generating. It's not your interpretation of whether it was 2,500 or 1,500 isn't that it has to deliver a school. That's not, the school has to be funded by the local education authority or other means over and above what the housing generates.
Yes, I mean, there's an element where self-evidently there will be less financial contribution for a smaller development. It'll be a matter for the feasibility study what impact that might have on the nature of school provision. But one might conclude, as we've said in our representations, that a large development gives more options because it provides more funding for school provision than you get with a smaller scale of development.
Okay, thank you. I just thought it'd be helpful just to clarify that so that your position is clear and the council can think about what its position is, whether it shares that view about what's expected from the house builder in terms of it just basically paying for its own additional need, or whether this policy was intended to deliver a whole package of things that it would be self-funded by the whole development as a whole, which is something slightly different, I think. So no need to respond to that now, but I think that's something we will come back to, because it's about the whole, you know, the whole essence of what this benefit of this proposed strategic site is, I think. Right, is there anything else on viability that anybody wishes to say in terms of the evidence, etc.? You know, we'll come back to policies and allocations. Yeah.
Just very briefly, you mentioned inconsistencies between numbers. If you look at the infrastructure delivery plan, you'll find yet another set of figures for costs. Thank you.
Yeah, did I ask the council to respond to that or not? I don't know. Or did I say think about it and respond when we come back to North East Thatcham? I can't remember. But yes, the point is you've got a set of requirements in SP 17 for infrastructure. You've got things identified in the Thatcham growth study. You've got things identified in the IDP, and you've got things that are costed in the VA. And you're saying you've looked at them and you think there's some inconsistencies.
And the vision is the Vision 2050 is yet another source of inconsistency. Thank you.
Okay, right. Okay, so that's viability dealt with. And again, we're on strategic and local road network now, which again, when we're talking about the impacts of individual allocations and things, we're going to come back to this, but this is a sort of a strategic look at where we are with the various highway authorities. The context for this is that national policy advises that development should only be prevented if it would have an unacceptable impact on highway safety, or the residual cumulative impacts on the strategic road network would be severe. And that local plans should ensure that any significant impacts on the development on the transport network in terms of capacity and congestion or on highway safety can be cost effectively mitigated to an acceptable degree. So this is about looking at the evidence of what we've got and what it indicates the impacts will be, and what the view of the various highway authorities is. So, as I said, we'll come back to the site-specific impacts, including on M4 Junction 13 and the local road network and the railway crossings at North East Thatcham when we look at that under Matter 4. So we won't look at those in detail today. When we do look at Matter 4, I know that Bucklebury Parish Council has submitted its own transport assessment evidence with, as did Coldash Parish Council. So I'm assuming that the council will have looked at that. And the main about alternative assessment. I'm just flagging that up now. I don't want you to come in and be caught on the back foot, because if you've had that some time. And Mr.
Thank you, sir. It's just an additional point to that. With the matter statement that Lichfield submitted, there is other information on highways within that as well. I'm just unsure of the status of that, whether you are accepting that into this examination, first of all.
Well, that's a good point. I mean, they've put in a lot of information with the Matter 4 statement, which I'm not giving a great deal of weight to, quite honestly, because it is a lot of information late on. So it's in there, but I'm not asking you, and I won't be asking detailed comments about it. I mean, there's a concept plan and there's all sorts of things. Insofar as it's technical evidence about transport, it may be relevant, but I'm not suggesting, you know, that really that you need to, well, it's up to you to decide what to do. I'm focusing on the transport assessment work that the council did, justified the plan, and you've got the information, you know, you looked at that at Reg 19, as did Coldash Parish Council, and did a critique of it, and I've got some points that we can deal with under that. Okay. Right, just a general point about the transport evidence then. It was prepared during the preparation of the plan, quite rightly, to inform the plan, and it looked ahead to 2037. Whereas I think it looks ahead to 2037 because of when the assessment was done. But the submitted plan looks ahead to 2039 and the council's proposed modifications to look ahead to 2041. So the question is, does that mean that the transport evidence is still relevant and up to date or not? Who am I looking at here? Sorry. The council have been divided into.
Thank you, Sarah. I'll take that. Just for clarity, I am Jenny Graham, the Environment Delivery Manager at the council, and I have with me Sally Powell from WSP. And WSP are the consultants that have led on our transport modelling work for us. So just to take your question, sir, the submitted information, part of the evidence base does go to 2037, you're correct. Since then, we have updated that to reflect the position at 2039. And then a decision was taken not to further update that to 2041 because it's so far ahead, and we considered that the 2039 position that has been modelled would be satisfactory. So there is additional evidence taking it to 2039. That is unfortunately not in the evidence base, but it is available and can be made available. And the work that National Highways have inspected as part of our ongoing work with them is the 2039 forecast date. So they have assessed and rigorously looked at that evidence rather than the 2037. I hope that clarifies.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful. In terms of the update that you've done but not published, because I haven't asked for it, so thank you for not publishing it. I can ask for it if I want it. But looking ahead to 2039, I mean, does it make any significant difference to the impacts and the mitigations that are set out in the plan?
Sorry. The updates we've made to reflect the 2039, the moving on of the plan year, took into account a number of updates that included the up-to-date tempo forecast. That was NTEM dataset 8 rather than 7.2, latest tag datasets, and also the changes in certain site allocations, including the reduction at North East Satcham from 2,500, which was in the 2037 assessment. That was reduced to 1,500 in the 2039 assessment, as well as a number of other sites. So that was sort of as up to date as it could possibly be. But in terms of what that modelling showed, it didn't really show any different conclusions in terms of where the impacts were, where the sort of hotspots or any kind of thing that needs to be looked at in terms of mitigation. Nothing was different.
Okay, so the impacts were not significantly different, and what's even more important, I suppose, to me is that the mitigations that the plan includes don't need to be different based on the evidence that you've looked at.
Yeah, so the mitigation that was proposed, which was the junction improvements along the A4, I think what was in the 2737 pack was, I think there was some junction modelling done, which led to very slight variations, but it was a slight reduction, I think, in terms of the scale of changes. But we're talking lane modifications, not.
And I'm thinking about the words in the plan,
Yeah.
which are not expressed in terms of detailed highway design. They're expressed in terms of other things. So it wouldn't require changes to what basically the plan's asking for. It may change some, and that'll be further assessments when master plans are worked up and the planning applications are worked up, etc. Okay, thank you. That's helpful. With regard to the strategic road network, your statement said that there are no showstoppers, but additional work was being carried out to assess the potential impact of development, well, cumulative impact of development, particularly North East Thatcham on junction 13 of the M4 in conjunction with National Highways. Then on Friday last week, a statement of common ground was published with National Highways, which I've read. And if we turn to paragraph 20 towards the end, it says, subject to the National Highways completing a review of the recently presented information, which is detailed above in the note, and which is, I think you've referred to, and that's partly the update to 2039, etc. The council will have addressed the questions and concerns raised by National Highways. National Highways do not consider that the issues raised to date relate to the soundness of the plan. The completion of the current National Highways review would likely lead to further engagement and, if necessary, inform future updates to the infrastructure delivery plan. So can I feel reassured that National Highways are happy with what the plan proposes, and that the mitigations as expressed in the plan will be effective in delivering the, addressing the issues?
Yes, I think that's a fair conclusion. So I think that that paragraph was indicating the ongoing relationship that we've got with National Highways, and the fact that that will continue to pick up any things that that we need to, because obviously things change, and we will just carry on that relationship. That they are satisfied with the approach to the modelling that we've done. They're satisfied with the impact on the strategic road network, and the fact that our approach, in their view, is sound.
Okay, thank you. And I don't think National Highways are intending to participate in any of the sessions, which they could do if they had outstanding concerns. So that deals with the motorway, basically. Well, the strategic road network. Is it just the motorway that?
It's the M4 and the A34.
8034 as well, yeah. Okay. Right. So that's National Highways, and that's their bit of strategic road network. Hampshire County Council did raise some issues in Reg 19. You've provided information since then, and you say there are no outstanding issues about the impacts on the roads that County Council is responsible for. And there's an email from them, which is exam 16, which was published in March. So as far as you're concerned, Hampshire County Council, again, are not participating. They're okay as Highway Authority with the plan.
That's correct, sir.
Okay. So that's two highway authorities. The other highway authority is West Berkshire Council, presumably. Yes. Yes. Okay. And the West Berkshire County, West Berkshire Council as highway authority is also satisfied with the evidence and with the plan proposals, so that it meets the NPPF tests.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And also that the cost of the necessary mitigations can be met, i.e. the way they're expressed in the plan is in fairly general terms, but they're backed up with the evidence, the analysis and the IDP, and that's costing. There could be discussions about some of the details, but from the council's point of view as highway authority, it's satisfied that, as highway authority, all this development's not going to create it as a problem as highway authority.
Yes, any of the significant infrastructure improvements that are required have been included in the infrastructure delivery plan, and therefore assessed in that way.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And the approach to securing the transport mitigations in the plan, I don't know if this is, I'm addressing this to who, but it's set out in a series of policies in effect, because you've got site-specific allocations that have requirements in them, but you've got some strategic policies as well, SP23 and SP24, and a development management policy 42. So when you add all those things up, the plan identifies in general terms the mitigations needed for each developer, and it sets out processes by which that will be assessed through the planning application, or the master planning and planning applications stages, including through transport assessments, if necessary, depending on the scale, and then securing the mitigations through the normal procedures of the legislation and planning conditions. So you're satisfied that the plan as drafted with the modifications is effective in making sure those mitigations are provided in a timely way?
Yes, we're happy that those policies that you have listed cover all of that, and will ensure that the infrastructure mitigation can be provided.
Okay, thank you. Well, that's helpful clarification of the evidence and the council's position and the position of the other highway authorities. So that sets the context, which again, we can come back to when we look at site specifics. But anything else, anybody else wants to say on the transport evidence? Yes.
Thank you very much, sir. Our starting point was to take you to the MPPF paragraph 104D, which effectively is enjoining plan-making authorities to make sure that they take appropriate opportunities for avoiding and mitigating any adverse effects. And this comes back to a wider point about a lack of allocation in the eastern areas. The fact that my site was due to be allocated in the site allocations development plan document and was taken out because IKEA came along and everybody was terribly anxious about the traffic in the months after IKEA opened. So I got taken out for that reason. I come along later, make a planning application that demonstrates that there's no highway objection to my proposal. And so you can understand where we're coming from in terms of the strategy, which seems to be all focused on the West, where, as we sit here now, we still don't have, I would suggest, absolute clarity on what is required in terms of highway improvements and the cost of those improvements. And you've mentioned the statement of common ground. We actually looked with our transport consultants at the documents that we could look at. And obviously there's been a huge amount of discussion going on with no disclosure as far as I can see. But I'd just like to draw attention to a few points, if I may, because it was us that was pointing out in our documents that what had been assessed in TA1, TA2 was a much reduced number of homes over a shorter period of time. And the other thing I think that's important is if I take you back to TA1, one of the things that was said there was that the modelling results were assuming that by 2036, all of Sandalford Park was in, and all of the mitigation associated with Sandalford Park was in. So there's a point there about what happens if Sandalford Park doesn't come forward, because there's a long history of Sandalford Park not coming forward in the way it was intended. So that we were concerned to understand what happens in that world, but also this point about the policy, particularly the policy for North East Thatcham, is not spelling out the junctions that need to be improved. The viability work isn't costing because it all precedes this. And now we find ourselves with exam 25. I think that's what the latest statement of common ground is identified as. And as I say, there are lots of documents there which I can't comment upon because we haven't seen them. They've not been published on the council's website. And the picture is very much that the infrastructure delivery plan will get reviewed and updated, but we don't know when. So it seems to me, bearing in mind, we are going to come on, or you will be coming on later, sir, luckily without me, to discuss things like the trajectory. All these points and the lack of clarity go to the certainty or otherwise that you can have in the council's current trajectory for Thatcham.
Okay, in terms of what's available or what isn't available, I mean, I'll have a think about this, but the plan was submitted with transport evidence, and essentially there were some outstanding concerns some outstanding issues that were raised by National Highways as a highway authority and the county council. And further work has been done, and this is what this note is addressing, and the further work with the Hampshire County Council. Bottom line, therefore, seems to be that all the highway authorities are now satisfied based on the evidence that it's submitted and with further reassurance. that the plan, you know, meets the tests of the NPPF. So I will think about that in relation to sites, and we'll drill into some of the evidence more specifically. In terms of IDP and the specificity of the plan in terms of detailed highway works that are needed, there's no prescribed way of dealing with that. You're right, though, in the sense that what I need to be satisfied is that, you know, the site can be delivered to the trajectory that is expected with the necessary mitigation. So there's a balance there. So that's all, you know, that's what I'd say about that. Let's Thatcham and then Bucklebury.
Thank you, sir. So I've just been comparing the infrastructure delivery plan for 2023, the submission one, with the previous one in 2021. And the figures are remarkably similar, in other words, the same, even though there's been inflation in construction and the size of the North East Thatcham site has been reduced, which calls into some question the validity of those numbers. Thank you.
Bucklebury.
Thank you, sir. I'm just struggling to see how we've moved from a position in September 2023 and the council's response to your preliminary questions. Page 4, at the top of that, they set out the position of National Highways. And in that it says, does not consider that the transport evidence base is sufficiently developed to inform a view on whether the plan is sound at that point. And then it sets out a number of things and includes, it says, neither is it clear that the delivery of growth can be controlled such that it is in pace with the availability and necessary transport interventions and unacceptable impacts on the highway safety do not occur. And it affects what Ms Cook was talking to you about around timings of that. So those were the concerns at that point. We know further work has been undertaken. We've seen kind of further information on that. And then we're led to this position in paragraph 20 of the Statement of Common Ground that talks then about the further subject to National Highways completing a review of the recently presented information detailed above. So you're being told that there's no issues of soundness. We haven't actually seen that from National Highways because that detailed review hasn't been undertaken. And at the bottom of that paragraph 20 in the Statement of Common Ground, the completion of the current National Highways review will likely lead to further engagement and, if necessary, to inform future updates of the infrastructure delivery plan, which then takes you in a circular motion back to viability and deliverability and soundness. So I think you're being told no showstoppers, fine. Further work being undertaken, fine. No issues of soundness. But if that outcome of the National Highways review points towards those things, that is a matter of soundness. And we do say there's an issue with this, not what you're being told by the council.
Yeah, understood. I think we'll come back to it when we talk about individual sites, because it really comes into focus, doesn't it? When you look at the requirements, what makes a particular site deliverable or not, and what the mechanisms are and the timing, etc. In terms of the, you've heard the council say that they've done this further update work and that there aren't any significant, it doesn't show any significant impacts or any changes to the mitigations that are required as described in the plan. Are you suggesting that you would like to look at the detail of this evidence?
I mean, simply put, we're at an examination stage where normally this information would have been done and presented to you, and it would be clear that it is clear and deliverable. We say so. It's not particularly savoury that we're now sitting in this position waiting for further information from National Highways, a further review. We don't know the timings of that. And I think this is a matter that, you know, with respect, so yes, we can go to individual policies, but to me, this is a systemic matter within the plan of whether the plan that you're examining is a viable, deliverable and sound plan.
Yeah, the plan is supported by a considerable amount of transport assessment. Subsequently, in discussion with National Highways and Hampshire County Council, there's been some further work to supplement that. It's not as if it's, you know, the bulk of the transport evidence has become late. It's more of a checking to see if it's still up to date, and it provides the reassurance that the highway authorities need. But that said, if I'll ask the council, presumably this work that's referred to in exam 25, and specifically the assessment you did to update it to 2039, it could be published, could it?
Yes, absolutely. That 2039 forecast report can be published. Yes.
Okay. And in terms of and that work is what National Highways are still just, they've looked at it, you've talked to them about it, but they're completing its review. What does that actually mean?
Just for clarity, National Highways have completed the review of that report. They then came back with additional requirements of the council to do some more detailed modelling around junction 13 in particular. That has been done, and they have them mainly through their assessment of that and to the point where they're confirmed that they were largely satisfied with that. I think the outstanding element that the statement of common ground refers to is focused around the last part of that assessment. So I'm happy that they have done the review of the majority of the work that we have submitted to them. They did then come back with some more, but because that's been quite recent, they are just finishing off reviewing that, which is why I think they didn't want to say it was complete in their statement of common ground. But we can provide additional clarity for that, sir, if you wish, that can be referred to later on.
And in terms of when you talk about the detailed design, is you getting to the point where is it getting to a point where the detailed design is either possible or not possible, or is it a detailed design is you can do it, you know, it's like this or like that?
Sorry, yeah, I think what Jenny was saying is it's not detailed design as such. What they asked for was just some further detailed assessment of the SRN around that junction 13 and the A34. For example, looking at the merge and diverge, just in terms of a safety aspect. That was the only part of the SRN from what's been modelled in the strategic model. That was the only part they were really focused on in terms of needing to look at a bit more detail. So they requested us to do that detailed work, junction modelling in terms of looking at capacity of the motorway junction, and then looking at this safety and merging assessment of the A34. And as Jenny said, it's been so recent that that's why it's not been submitted, but they have had all the information, they have been reviewing it. And as Jenny said, they just didn't want to say it's complete because they're just finishing it off.
See, I'm a simple planner and not a highway engineer, so I struggle with all this. But the fundamental point is that this work going on and this further detail assessment that's needed and what it may lead to, is there anything as, you know, from National Highways point of view, or from the council's point of view, or from you as a transport consultant's point of view, that suggests that it, you know, there's not a solution, or the solution is going to be so different that it's going to be so different in cost than what you've been saying based on all the evidence work you've done over the last few years? That's what I'm looking for reassurance about, I think.
Yes, the modelling that that has been done didn't indicate that any solution was needed. It indicated where, you know, many parts of the network, there were flows where flows are going to increase, and there might be it might get close. The links may get close to capacity, or the junctions, because it's strategic. They just that's useful for them to see where they might want to see the more detailed junction modelling, which is much better at properly assessing the capacity of a junction. And they were satisfied that it didn't indicate that it would be significantly over, you know, wouldn't be over capacity and something was needed. They were satisfied that we didn't propose, or West Berkshire weren't proposing that any mitigation was needed. They were satisfied with that, I think.
Thank you. Right. So in terms of what could be published, just to be clear, and if people wish to look at it and refer to it at, well, I have to think at an appropriate time. I guess it's in terms of what it would, how it would relate to the requirements in particular policies or allocations. Could you just summarise to me, when you refer to the transport evidence and the update in the statement of common ground, what would it be that would be that could be published in addition to what's already there?
I think the starting point would be to publish the updated forecasting model, which takes it out to 2039 and also takes the opportunity to update some of the other data and inputs into that, which Sally outlined earlier. So it is an updated picture, and I think that would be the best thing for us to publish. Much of the other work that we provided for National Highways was very much relating to the junctions on the strategic road network and gets into quite a lot of technical detail and additional detailed modelling. It might not be so much of a good read.
Okay, right. Well, but I think seeing as you've referred to that information and that work, and that's the basis of the agreement as you describe it, what you've explained National Highways' position is, I think it'd be helpful for that to be available if people wish to look at it. I don't think what I'll be doing, if I do confirm that I wish it to be published, I'll be looking for, written responses to that, but it'll be available there amongst all the other evidence about, what we can conclude in terms of the impacts. But obviously, ultimately, the highway authorities are responsible, and the NPPF test is the NPPF test, which is set at a high bar. So, that's my sort of perspective on all this. Okay, any other comments that people wish to make on the transport evidence? I think we've covered everything that I wanted to cover. And if not, we can finish that issue, which means we've dealt with all of the items under matter 1 this morning, which is good, which means we've got this afternoon to talk about the amount of development needed and the plan period that it relates to. Are there any questions or last points that anybody wishes to make? Anything further the council wishes to say? No? Okay. So we will break there. We won't start before 2 o'clock, so we will start at 2 o'clock on matter 2. So thank you for your contributions. No, Mr. Pike.
Thank you. Earlier on, you asked the council and Ms. Lambert to provide a note relating to the compliance of the sustainability appraisal. I have got one already written myself. If you'd like to receive that, I've made a note. I've written a note myself, which I was thinking of submitting to a later matter and couldn't. So I already have the document explaining in writing what the position I tried to explain orally earlier this morning. If that would be useful to you. I've not said definitely that I'll be asking the council to do a note. I may do. If I do, I'll probably set out how I want it, what I want. In fact, what I might say in it, that you liaise with you, Mr. Pike, in terms of defining what your question is and the council's response to it. So we can in effect get a mini statement of common ground between Thatcham Town Council, Simon Pike, and his other hats, and the council on that particular issue. So thank you. Okay, right, we'll break there and we'll resume at 2 o'clock for those. I don't know if everyone's back this afternoon, but most of us are, I think. Thank you.